Just 1 second, because I can't record just yet.
Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is 12:32. Thank you for your 2 minutes of patience as we got everything ready to record. My name is Marlo Lemon, and I'm the commission chair. So thank you. I wanted to thank you ahead of time because we know that we added time to this meeting, but we want to make sure that all thoughts are captured and that everyone has input for all of the recommendations. So thank you for everyone who is here. We also needed to make sure that we have a quorum, and we do. We're looking at notes in the chat, so we have enough to get ready to get started. So thank you so much for everyone who are here and who arrived early. I have a hard stop today at 4. So if the conversation is really good, that's awesome, but I have a hard stop today at 4. So I wanted to let you know. Just for logistical purposes today, if you have your agenda or if you have it pulled up, we will discuss topic 5, then topic 3. We started topic 5 at the end of the last meeting in November. After that time, since our meeting is a little bit longer today, we will take a little break, and then it says review of discussion of the recommendations. So then we'll go over the recommendations 1 through 10 that's on the agenda. So does anyone have any questions? Everyone online can hear okay? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for the thumbs up. So we are going to go ahead and get started. So that and I did want to let everyone know that the chat is captured at the end saved and captured at the end of the meeting. We have someone taking handwritten notes here, and the meeting is recorded. So as we are working towards solution-based recommendations, we want to make sure that if you have anything that you really want captured that's not said, that you make sure you put it in the chat. So right now we're going to have Scott continue our conversation on topic 5.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 4th session. For the record, my name is Scott Dennis, and I am the Assistant State Superintendent for the Division of Rehabilitation Services. The outline for today is we'll quickly go through the commission responsibilities again, then move through to commission topic number 5, which is improving accountability and transparency of the Division of Rehabilitation Services. And then we'll move on to topic 3, improving the amount of time to provide vocational rehabilitation and transitional services. And then I believe we're going to take a quick break for everybody's benefit. And then at that point, we'll come back and pick up with the review of the draft recommendations that we've captured thus far. So, okay. So again, next slide. Okay, again, the legislative content of what we're here for, and again, HB 660 requires that a commission to study the Division of Rehabilitation Services be established. The commission needs to meet at least 5 times and discuss a set of 10 different topics. We have an interim report that is due next week on the 15th, and then a final report that's due on March 15th, 2023. This is the list of the 10 topic areas. Okay, next slide. And so today, in particular, we're going to cover topics number 3 and topics number 5. Okay. Again, Last time we met, we started in the area of accountability and transparency, and there were some slides that we didn't get through as part of that presentation. So we just want to conclude with that and then move on to any discussions and feedback from that presentation, plus what we're presenting today, and then also see if there's any recommendations that you have. Again, with the fact that this is an interim report, there's going to be obviously other times that we can come back and add to different recommendations as the information you kind of think through it and mull through it. We'll have other opportunities to come back and add or modify existing recommendations from the interim report. So, DORS accountability. Just to kind of give you an idea of how we're held accountable as an agency. On a quarterly basis, we are to report all our data to the Rehab Services Administration on all client activity that occurred during that quarter. This data is compiled then into an annual report. Once that information is compiled, then all the information is posted on the Rehab Services Administration's website. You not only can see ours, but you can also see a comparison of every other state agency in the country for that particular year. In addition, DORS reports on a quarterly basis to our Maryland Rehabilitation Council. Our quarterly performances, which includes results from customer satisfaction surveys, as well as our performance information, and then and as well as the council does allow time for public comment and input during those meetings. Those meetings are posted. The Maryland State Rehabilitation Council has its own website, and those meetings and agendas are posted on that website. In addition, from an accountability standpoint, DORS is subject to a single state audit. This is both a financial as well as a program audit that audits us every year. They typically will review either the VR program or the DDS program. In the most recent audit, there was no major findings as a result of that audit. And in addition, as every state agency is, we're subject to the Office of Legislative Audit. These audits occur every 3 years. Again, they're reviewing all aspects of the division, looking at timeliness, is required by the federal rules and as well as documentation to make sure it substantiates the services that are being provided. And again, our last OLA audit, which was this past year, there was no major findings with the agency. And then again, finally, we're subject to a review by the Rehab Services Administration. This is an exhaustive review. They take a look at 5 years worth of data. They take a look and they kind of go through and they interview a number of individuals, both inside and outside the agency. They do quite a bit of work. Prior to that, they ask for a lot of information up front and then ask for a lot of information at the end after they've gone through it. Our monitoring was this past August. It lasted for two solid weeks, and we're waiting on our report at this point in time. Again, as with all state agency, audit reports and monitoring reports are public documents, so they are available to the public. DORS, as with all state agencies, are required to provide their annual performance measures to the governor's office and the General Assembly under the Managing for Results requirements. In addition, we have a comprehensive statewide needs assessment. This is an assessment we do every 3 years. It is, we involve a lot of people, again, both the public as well as our providers, our constituents that we serve, And based on that, we take a look at what we need to work on for the next 3 years. That comprehensive needs assessment was conducted this past summer, and it is now posted on the DORS website for people to review. In addition, DORS holds annual meetings to allow for the public to get their input about the programs and services that are offered through DORS. We meet 3 times a year with our community rehab providers to discuss what's going on with the division, as well as what issues that they're facing, and so we can come to a mutual understanding and agreement as to how to move forward. In addition, DORS staff attend numerous transitioning fairs around the state, as well as conferences to discuss DORS services. Next. Okay. All right. As far as what we currently do is some of the other initiatives we've undertaken, DORS has posted its quarterly customer satisfaction survey. So those questions are available, and you can take a look. The most recent in 2022, we had a satisfactory response or a neutral response 83% of the time on the overall satisfaction survey. DORS is also working with San Diego State. You've heard me speak of this before on a data analytic tool, which will enable us to analyze the data from the last 5 years to identify service trends and take a look at the information and outcomes that were produced as a result of those services. And this data can be disaggregated down to by disability type, by race, by gender, by statewide, and down to even the county level. Finally, DORS has partnered with Parents Place on listening sessions with parents, including those in the Hispanic and Latino communities. And once that report is finalized, we will be sharing that with the State Rehabilitation Council. So those, combined with what we heard last time from Massachusetts, we're more than welcome to discuss any way to increase accountability and transparency.
We have 2 questions.
Okay.
The first one is, what percentage of consumer reports respond to the survey?
Okay, I believe this was asked a couple of weeks ago. We receive about, I believe this last time, it was around a 14.5% response rate when we take a look at it across the year. When is the tool expected to be functional? The analytic tool, we're currently in testing mode of it, and will be, while that's not at this point in time, we're still working through all the details, and so that information that we glean from that we'll probably start sharing out sometime next year.
And this next question, Scott, I don't know whether or not you want to take it or for Renee. It's, when is the report from the listening sessions expected, and how many listening sessions were there, and when and where were they held?
Yeah, I guess I should answer that one, right? So the report should be either tomorrow or Monday. It's in review right now to make sure that there aren't any typos. And then there were 4 sessions, 3 in English, 1 in Spanish, and those were all conducted virtually. There was 1 in September, and then the rest were in October.
And how many people participated in each session?
On average, we had about 8 on average. So we had about 25 folks total that participated, which, because I just got done analyzing this data, we had 40 folks that were registered.
Oh, good,
Golly, Pete, I'm sorry.
You're good.
I'm so used to, with my big mouth, not needing a microphone, so I apologize to the folks on Zoom. So we had about 25 folks participating, even though we had 40 folks registered. So we had about a 63% attendance, which is actually better than what we usually get with our virtual presentations. We usually get about 50%. I see head shakes. People see that's usually about the average of that.
Okay.
Jane?
Jake?
So, I think that from an accountability perspective, based on my experience with DORS, you can't hear me?
Oh, no, you're okay.
Oh, okay, sorry. I think that you guys have lots of different measures that you have to account for and lots of different people. And I think that you guys really do an exceptional job and sort of meeting all of the expectations, some of which are very, particularly with the changes with WIOA, we're changing fast and furious, right? So I'm not quite certain if there were concerns about accountability, because I think that DORS does an exceptional job from that accountability perspective. I did wonder about, when we talk about transparency and so forth, I think it's important to acknowledge that many of the outcomes that DORS needs to report out on are achieved through partnerships through your vendors and your contractors. And I know that the Developmental Disabilities Administration has started to capture outcome data. You can find a list on their website of who all the providers are, as well as their employment outcome data. And I'm wondering if, from a transparency perspective, and to help families and individuals who are making choices amongst providers, if there might be a way to start to model what DDA has done and put some of that information out, that might be helpful. And again, I think it's also important to sort of acknowledge it's a partnership that you guys engage in to achieve these outcomes. So we can't be completely focused on, well, DORS needs to do things differently. It's that broader community of how can all of us work with DORS together to improve the outcomes, from the perspective of the audiences and so forth. So that's just one of my recommendations.
Okay. I think-
Megan?
Yep. Go ahead.
Megan has a question, and then Ellen.
Thanks. I was going to ask, in the Massachusetts presentation, they talked about how their client assistance program is a feature of accountability for them, and helps sort of report back consumer feedback or concerns. And so I was just hoping to hear a little bit about how the CAP is functioning in Maryland and what they're reporting back about what they're hearing from consumers.
Well, the CAP does report back. A lot of it that we have heard from kind of deals with order selection at times, as well as service delivery. And so we work very closely with them to try and resolve any type of disagreement over providing of services, or even in the eligibility and the order selection piece of this, to try to resolve it. Obviously, if an individual disagrees with the agency's decision, then they can appeal that to the Office of Hearings and Appeals. This past year, I believe we only had one case that went to the Office of Hearings and Appeals, and we were able to resolve all the other appeals that came to that was brought to our attention. So yeah, we kind of we try to work with them and make sure that we try to come to a win-win situation for the consumer.
Ellen?
Thank you.
Welcome.
So wonderful to be with everyone this afternoon. This topic number 5, I think, relates very closely to topic number 1, which is methods of improving stakeholder input. And the fact that there's only, and please forgive me if I misunderstood, but basically around a 14% consumer response to the surveys. I think the recommendations under topic 1 mostly relate to what I would recommend for topic number 5. And one of my recommendations that we talked about the last meeting was to have at least one pre-IEP team meeting with the family members and, if appropriate, the student to talk about transition issues in a less overwhelming environment, because often IEP teams, there's lots of people and lots of jargon and lots of acronyms. So in terms of accountability and transparency, I strongly recommend reducing the number of acronyms and jargon that's used, and thinking about other ways to include family members. And family members, it can also be extended family. Lots of my clients have grandparents who are the primary caregivers, or aunts and uncles, or even older siblings. So involving them and starting at age 14 to make sure that they really understand what DORS is, what the possibilities are. So that's one of the suggestions we made. And also under our topic number 1, we talked about two-way communication at the LEA level about services that are being provided. I think you would get a lot of good information from IEP chairpersons and transition specialists at both public and non-public schools. So anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that most of the recommendations that we've made under topic 1, I think, are relevant for recommendations for topic number 5. So thank you.
Yeah, this is Jody Boone, Director of the Office of Field Services. I just want to respond briefly to Ellen about the two-way communication between the transition specialist. So we do have that. So DORS has an assigned liaison, a transition youth specialist in each district, definitely in each region, so it depends on the districts, that work very closely with the school transition specialist. So we do have that two-way communication. I think over the past couple of years with COVID and everything else, it's been interrupted a bit. But I know we are in the process, and Eugene is very well aware of this as well. We're in the process of updating our local school system MOUs, and part of that MOU is really spelling out that two-way communication and the cross-training between the DORS staff and the school staff. So that's definitely a priority of ours. So thank you.
Renee?
I think I've got it turned on. So I love Ellen's recommendation. The more the merrier, right? Particularly, because that's what we hear from families. Even at 14, families feel like we've started transition too late. I love the recommendation. I think we need to be really careful about clarifying the roles, because even though DORS is in MSDE, it is an entity unto itself, right? So I think we need to figure out what that can look like, right? Because there's a lot of kids that are turning 14 or almost 14, right? But there's that. And secondly, while I do appreciate the work with DORS staff and being assigned and transition specialists, I think they've definitely, obviously there's always room, right? But I think the other issue is, particularly with the new version of the IEP, the MSDE IEP, transition has now been moved and is fully integrated. And I think a recommendation would obviously be is, okay, how do we do this with the IEP chairs. And because IEP chairs are very wide and varied in their knowledge and skill set, and I probably should just leave it there because I'm not an MSDE person, and before Eugene's head spins off and he goes, Renee, stop talking about IEP chairs. But I think, out to Ellen's point, this is really rich for some very robust recommendations.
We
May I
have
just
two
follow
comments
up
in the,
for a moment? I didn't know if someone else had their hand up before. I didn't see anybody, but so one, I think there is a really rich level of data that can be gotten with patience and kindness from families and from their children with disabilities, and at least starting at age 14, if accommodations are provided and plain language and time to process. It's sometimes hard for families and for children, even though they're 14 years of age and older, to think about the rest of their lives. And parents, I represent adults with disabilities too, and even the parents of adults with disabilities still often think of their children, as minors. So the process for getting the feedback, and that's part of the accountability and transparency, is going to require a real investment and training with whoever's meeting with families and meeting with students to take their time and to understand what the best way is to communicate. Often there is someone at the school that the family and the student trusts the most, and sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes it's the nurse. Sometimes it's the art teacher. It's not always the mental health person. So finding the person that the family trusts, and then finally finding a way to communicate that data, which is going to be anecdotal, but still very important, back to DORS so that DORS can improve in the provision of services. The overriding question that the Commission has not yet talked about that I'm aware of is, and it gets back to Renee's comment, is what is the benefit to individuals with disabilities of DORS being housed at MSDE? What do individuals with disabilities gain from that, being part of that organization? And are there ways that we can make suggestions as a commission to either improve that connection with MSDE and the benefits from MSDE? Or I know part of our function is to talk about whether DORS should be with another entity or be a separate entity. And then the other piece under that, which is kind of an umbrella, is what is the level of funding that DORS would need in order to meet the needs of everybody on the waiting list, for them to feel like they can come to team meetings for 14-year-olds starting early. Because what I think Megan and other people hear from teams is, oh, don't bother to ask for the DORS person to come. They're not going to come when the child's only 14. So when we're talking about, budget recommendations, I'd like to hear a number. I'd like to know what would DORS need in order to meet all of the needs of the human beings with disabilities, with the most significant and with significant disabilities, and we're on the waiting list. What level of staffing would that be? And what is the benefit to individuals with disabilities for DORS to be housed within MSDE? And are there ways to strengthen those benefits? And now I will be quiet.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm going to read Megan's comment first, and then Jade has a comment. The feedback I've heard from the community is that we need to make it less overwhelming for parents and students to connect with DORS, DDS. Shanika agreed. And then the next comment is, and I agree with Ellen, a piece of this is definitely a plain language review document and make sure that they are accessible to students and families. As a mom, I agree, and I see Eugene clapping his hands. So definitely the connection is overwhelming, the acronyms are overwhelming. So, Jane.
So I do a lot of work in the transition space across the partner agencies, both at the state level and also nationally. And I think it's important to have some understanding of sort of the history of the laws and where the lines are, right or wrong, right, as it relates to this. So schools are governed by IDEA. Maryland has made the decision to start transition planning at age 14 versus age 16. The law requires it at age 16. Now, historically, our Division of Rehabilitation Services, this is Jade Gingrich with the Maryland Department of Disabilities. Historically, the Division of Rehabilitation Services came in at the final 2 years. Typically, the school provides the information, the families make the decision and or give consent. So it's very much family driven, and that still needs to be that. The schools provide the information, the family chooses whether or not to apply, then they're found eligible. Because other states were not as proactive as Maryland in terms of transition and that engagement with the Division of Rehabilitation Services, and other states were giving significant amount of monies back, that was not happening here in Maryland. They made the decision at the federal level to create the changes to create pre-employment transition services. Now, they didn't add additional funds to that. I think we've discussed previously about the impact financially that has on Maryland. But I think that schools have a role and responsibility up to a point. And I feel like when we're talking about having pre-IEP meetings, we're getting into the gray zone of what I would term as being DORS' role and responsibility as it relates to that IEP process, because which comes first, right? Like, how can DORS meet with someone if the schools haven't, and so forth. So I just want to be careful that we're acknowledging that the IEP process is what's driving transition and that requirement of a transition plan. Schools provide the information and linkage. I think we do need to do a better job of what's being provided, how it's being provided, how are we equipping the school staff to make the case about the benefits to applying for DORS. And when that connection has occurred, then DORS comes in, but otherwise, I think just from a process standpoint, that really muddies the water in terms of where some of the lines are that aren't within, I think, our power to change or influence, or would significantly change the scope of work beyond and add more money on to what we're talking about. So so anyway, I just wanted to share that. And Scott and Jody, feel free to correct me if I misstated any of the rules and where the lines are, or Eugene and so forth, but that's my understanding.
Thanks, Jade.
Ellen, did you hear that was Jade?
Yes, thanks so much. And I think Jade misunderstood my recommendation. And actually, this was a recommendation that came from the Governor's Commission on Special Education Access and Equity, which was to offer to families to have a meeting one-on-one with them and, when appropriate, with the student prior to an IEPT meeting. I was not suggesting that someone from DORS needed to be at those pre-IEP meetings. That may be appropriate in some cases, but I think the majority of the cases would require someone who is part of either the public school or the non-public school, who's familiar with DORS and familiar with transition and familiar with the child, and familiar with what the goals are going into the team meeting, to sit down and have a plain language conversation about, gosh, Mrs. Jones, what are your hopes for this meeting? Hey, Johnny, what are your, how's school going? What are your hopes? And it's just a really simple, direct, no jargon. And one of the topics for that pre-IEP meeting can be DORS. I would think that a DORS representative would not need to be in that meeting unless there was a specific issue that needed to be addressed. Rather, I'm asking for a knowledgeable person to talk about transition. And then also maybe prior to the team meeting, if the DORS representative is coming, to have a conversation with them about what the family's goals are, what the students' goals are, so that that individual can be thinking about how they can be helpful in the team meeting. Anyway, and also, DORS can be part of the team. Obviously, the parent has to agree. Anyway, I see Megan wants to jump in and.
Thank you, Ellen. Dr. Lawson, and then Megan, I see your hand.
I guess I'm a little confused about who would be conducting these pre-IEP meetings, because Jade is right in her assessment of we have to be very careful that we don't overstep what we have the authority to commit to as a commission. So who would you suggest be a part of these pre-IEP meetings, and what would be their role again? If you could explain that to me again, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. So this was a unanimous recommendation from the Governor's Commission on Special Education Access and Equity, and it's highly individualized. So who should be in that pre-IEP meeting with the parents is somebody who is knowledgeable, somebody who the parents or the family members feel comfortable with. And the purpose of it is to allow, in a non-overwhelming with, 8, 10, 15, and some of my team meetings, there's 20 people, give a chance for family members to ask questions, and for a school staff member, we either want just, one or very small group of people answer the family's questions and or the students' questions when it's appropriate to have a student there, and talk about the goals and talk about who's going to be at the team meeting. Because I can tell you, families often walk into these meetings and they really don't know who these people are. They're overwhelmed and just, and everybody's using jargon and acronyms and whatever, and they're too embarrassed to stop and say, "I'm sorry, who are you, sir? How do you know my child? And what is your role with my child?" So the answer is, it is anyone who is knowledgeable, with whom the family would feel comfortable and not feel like an idiot to ask, what we might characterize as dumb questions, which there are no dumb questions, as we know. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Megan?
Yeah, I want to try and give an example of what I've seen in my casework that might help kind of explain, because I agree with what Ellen's saying about the importance of having a meeting with parents and the student beforehand. I have had cases where students have an IEP already. They're 17 years old. They or 18 years old. They've finished their credits for graduation, or maybe only have a few left, so they don't need a full day of school. We're trying to figure out what to do if they have one class or two classes in the morning, what to do with their afternoons. We agree that it should be something transition related, employment related. I know the family knows that they're connected with DORS. They have a DORS counselor. The school, in some cases, has not realized that connection has happened, which brings in a point Eugene made, I think, at an earlier meeting about if the connection is made with DORS first, it's just as important to let the school know that that's happened as it is for the school to make the referral. So I have facilitated that happening, like giving the information to the school that the student's connected with DORS. We've had an IEP meeting that DORS may or may not have been invited to attend. We've been sort of floundering around discussing what transition things might be able to happen. I have then had to go and make the connection with the DORS counselor to say, what is the student receiving, to take that information back to the school. I've had to request follow-up meetings with schools to invite the DORS counselor, and have had to invite them myself to the meeting. And when we're at the meeting, it's really like the first discussion between that DORS counselor and that IEP team about what the student is receiving, what the student could receive. It's the first time DORS is sometimes hearing about the IEP and what the student's receiving at school or doing at school, and often the first time, in my experience, the school is hearing what DORS is providing. And so it's like putting a puzzle together while we're also trying to have this larger discussion about educational planning. And I was trying to emphasize throughout that story, like it really is a lot of me as the advocate for the family making the connections between school team and DORS and student and family. And when I am told that when someone is not present actively making those connections and requesting those conversations to happen, it's not organically happening on its own. Like the team gets to the transition part, there's the agency linkage, it's presented as, Mom, Dad, do you want to sign this form to allow us to speak to DORS and DDA? It's presented as an acronym. I'm pretty sure on the IEP it says DDA and DORS. I don't think it says like any kind of explanation of what that agency is. And then parents are just asked, to consent, and sometimes an in-depth explanation isn't given, and so it can be really confusing. I'm sorry, baby's upset. And difficult for parents to get the information that they need to make those decisions in the middle of a meeting where they're also hearing about their students' strengths and weaknesses and academics and graduation and everything else that comes along with an IEP.
Thank you, Megan. Dr. Lawson?
Yes, thank you for that. I'm just trying to make sure I have a clear understanding. So are you saying that you are recommending whenever possible, if there are meetings in which DORS is invited, that a counselor is there from DORS? Is that what you're saying? Because I just want to make sure I have a clear understanding and try to make sure we delineate between what we can and cannot do as far as the commission is concerned.
So yeah, I guess to clarify my recommendation, and I'll let others jump in and clarify theirs, but to clarify my recommendation, I am recommending, I think as was recommended previously, that there be more communication between going the direction from DORS to the public schools, and I know that'll require a consent, but I think there should be some sort of standard consent form. Can we reach out to your school from the DORS end the way there is from the school end? So that's number one. I think that there should be efforts for DORS to connect with school teams when students self-refer or refer from some other way. Then I think that when DORS is involved for a student, they should be attending IEP meetings. I don't think that that's a thing we need to recommend, but I guess it wouldn't hurt to point out that they should be a part of that process, and that they should be, there should be discussions. And I think we can recommend that DORS connect with the school-based team and share information about this, get consent to talk to the team and share recommendations about the DORS services being provided. I understand that there might be, it might be more difficult for us to recommend that DORS be part of the pre-IEP, IEP team meeting or a separate meeting with the school and parents, but I do think we could suggest that DORS initiate that process of reaching out to the school. And, I want to flag Ellen's comment from earlier about the question that's been asked of the benefit provided to individuals with disabilities from DORS being housed within MSDE. Is there a way is that relationship able to foster greater communication between the transition liaison at DORS and IEP teams? Is there a way to make that relationship benefit students and help streamline this process, because I think what we're really coming up against is parents and students being overwhelmed by the acronyms and the linkages and the lengthy IEP meetings that they're sitting through. And I think that the valuable services that DORS can be providing sometimes get lost in that process or misunderstood or feel like another burden for parents to take on. And so figuring out a way that either MSDE or DORS could help streamline that process. I do think those are ways, if we're recommending DORS stay with MSDE, I think we could speak about why and consider whether there'd be any benefit in this regard.
Thank you, Megan. Eugene, I see you. Let me read the comment from Lillian. There is much discussion and recommendation around clarification of education and simplifying information related to DORS goals, processes, purposes, etc. Given this, I think it is important that in the interim and final reports, there be greater specificity in terms of how that will be accomplished. Eugene.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Rich and robust conversation. I think from day one, Jade and I has even had this conversation. When we're talking about post-secondary transition, again, I want to make sure that we clarify and be clear when we're talking about post-secondary transition and transition, because transition outside of, dare I say, those who know about DORS and transition specialists in particular, to the general public, if you say transition, they're going to think from elementary to middle to high, or maybe even, dare I say, grade to grade. So when we're talking about the connection to goals and DORS and adult agencies, we should be very deliberate with our language and use the word post-secondary transition versus just transition. Everything that, in terms of the, I don't want to say lack of communication, but the delay of communication between our agencies, be it MSDE with DORS, DORS to MSDE, MDL, BHA. Again, we have to collectively come up with a method of two-way electronic real-time communication. Again, from my 6 months here, everything I hear on the breakdown of that comes down to either some legal issue of privacy and data sharing between, you know, what is protected information. I'm not a lawyer. I'm gonna step back from that and let the lawyers deal with that. I know, however, on my phone, I subscribe to Kaiser Permanente. They call themselves an integrated health model. I readily get updates and I waive whatever privacy is necessary so that my endocrinologist can speak to my primary care physician and my pharmacist to make sure that my pills, whatever I need, blood work or whatever is delivered to me in real time so that I can come to work every day and serve the great students of Maryland. So in my opinion, we put a lot of emphasis, which we should, on privacy, and we need to put the best interest of the family and the student paramount. I think if we go to families, like you say, with plain language and tell them what we are doing and why we are doing it, many of them, if we develop that electronic platform, be it a website, an app, preferably, because many parents will engage with us through a cell phone technology and an app, that they will readily, just as I do, say, slide the little thing over, privacy granted, MSDE or local school system talk to DORS, DORS talk to the local school system, and communicate whatever is necessary so that there is that coordinated, seamless coordination of services in order to achieve positive post-secondary outcomes. The LEA can only do something or invite someone to the table with parent consent. That consent oftentimes is written, And we do not engage the parent many times until the parent comes to the table. So even if the parent signs that consent form at the table, the meeting is happening, there's no way for me to get a DORS or invite a DORS counselor there. So again, we gotta have that electronic communication. Sending home a consent form with a student, we know it's probably not gonna reach the parent. Sending it home in snail mail, we know it's probably not gonna reach the parent and get back to the school in 10 days advance notice. The school systems, post-secondary transition services are an entitlement, and we need to educate the parents that that ends once they exit the high school, and then anything happens on the adult service agency time, it becomes an eligibility process. So again, we need to do better communication, two-way communication, and make sure that we are very deliberate in the language that we're using to parents in terms of transition, post-secondary transition, and educating them on entitlement versus eligibility.
Thank you, Eugene. Sarah, you've been waiting so patiently. Thank you.
Thanks. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm just, trying to think of this coming from a public school teacher perspective. I feel like a lot of the discussion that we're having right now is, circling on what an IEP team should be doing or what the local school system should be doing. And I'm not quite sure, how we can turn this into more of a conversation about how can we make sure that DORS and the school system is communicating. As a teacher, I know what DORS does, but that's because I have an amazing transition coordinator in my county, and I know not all counties have that. So there's not always times where I feel like I need a DORS representative at my IEP meetings because I'm able to explain the services and direct the parent and the student for what they may need, but I know not a lot of counties have that. So, maybe we need to be thinking about how can we involve a trickle of communication between someone that's higher up and in communication with DORS down to the local school systems, to the case managers, because, each school system has however many case managers in their schools that's talking to the parents every day versus DORS, who doesn't have someone in the school every single day. So I feel like we are talking a lot right now about making sure that the IEP team is communicating with families. And I feel like we're trying to figure out ways that they can become more educated, but I feel like we need to direct this more towards what we need from DORS to our school system, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Sarah. Shanika said, consistent communication is a must. We have to select whether or not a student is receiving pre-ET services on the agency linkages section of the IEP. A lot of school teams do not have the information unless the parent or student shares it with them. Schools really need to know who is connected and what services they are getting while in school. The process is overwhelming for students and families. In some cases, it is overwhelming for school staff. In my district, there has historically been an issue with getting a DORS representative to attend even when a student is in their final year of high school. And someone said that they agreed with Eugene's idea of a secondary transition app. They thought it was a great idea. That was Megan and Ellen. How can we strengthen DORS capacity to be more involved with IEP teams, families, and schools? Do we need to recommend that DORS budget be increased to reduce caseloads and increase staffing?
Yes. No, this is Jody Boone again. I just wanted to respond to the last two comments. So we, in the field services, we have about 130 counselors. About 40 of them are full-time transition youth counselors. And if you look at the number of students with disabilities in Maryland, it's roughly 30 to 35,000, I believe. So there's no way possible that those 40, full-time counselors can do that. We do have approximately another 40 counselors that have some transition youth on their caseload, but their caseloads are primarily adults. And you want to keep in mind that our transition youth counselors have the highest number of students of any other counselor, and that can be upwards of 200 students. So I understand the need for them to attend IEP meetings, and I'm thankful that they can attend virtually in many cases, but there's no way physically possible that they could attend all in-person IEP meetings or pre-IEP meetings for that matter. So I just wanted to kind of put that fact out there, and I know we'll talk later about how to increase those numbers, but that's where we are today. And the other thing that Jade mentioned earlier, I did want to note, it really wasn't until the last 2 or 3 years that DORS started focusing on students at age 14. We had always focused on them in their second to last year of high school. So that might be age 17 or it might be age 20 or 21, just depending. So it has been a huge shift for us to go move back to age 14. And that's making that shift to serving a whole lot more students with the same number of counselors. So it's been a difficult transition, pardon the pun.
Jody, this is Renee. I also want to piggyback on what you said. So, and people have to understand, pre-ETS is not just kids on IEPs. It is 504 kids. It is yes, Dr. Lawson's face. So we're talking 504 kids, or it are people that have a disability, young kids that have a doctor's note that have a disability. So this is huge, the potential of the number of kids that are eligible for pre-ETS services. Doesn't mean they're going to be eligible for VR, but they are eligible for pre-ETS.
Thank you.
Ellen?
Yeah, I loved what Shanika wrote in her chat about how difficult it is to get a DORS counselor to get involved with a team and how important communication is. And I want to reassure everyone that I'm not suggesting that every child with a disability at every IEP team meeting has to have a DORS counselor. There are key points during a child's life that's why it's called an individualized education program, because for each child it's going to be a different time, but the conversation has to start at age 14. And I think the earlier speaker, and I apologize, those of us who are remote can't always tell who the speaker is, but the individual who was just saying, you know, it wasn't until the past couple of years that the pre-employment training services started, and they used to only come in either to the last year of school or the year before the last year. What I think is that myth that you can't ask DORS to come before either junior or senior year is perpetuated, and we still hear you know, teams saying, no, we don't get DORS involved until you know, Susie's 17, 18. So I think it's an individualized decision when a DORS provider should be there, either virtually or in person in a team meeting. But unless they get to know the child and understand what her strengths and weaknesses are, they don't really know how to counsel the family. And the other thing, the gentleman who's speaking about consent, I mean, in my experience, and maybe I just have, anyway, 99.9% of the families that I'm working with would consent to have DORS involved if they understood what that meant. So if it's made easier, and I think the gentleman was suggesting, you know, signing electronically like we do, because I've got, you know, my chart for the doctors, and so, you know, my husband can see all my medical records if I want him to. I mean, make it really easy to consent, and, you know, on both ends, because I think it will happen. I think it is the rare family that would say no to having DORS involved if they truly understood what it meant. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you. Megan said, I think we should differentiate between DORS attending every IEP or 504 meeting for pre-ET students and attending for a student receiving services under an individualized plan for employment from DORS. I do think when a student has an individual plan for employment from DORS, their counselor should be involved in the IEP process. I do thank you all for putting things in the chat, the recommendations, and I did hear and record that some of the suggestions from topic 1 have sort of carried over and spilled over to topic 5. So what we're going to do now is have Scott review topic 3, if we don't have any additional comments on this one. And then remember, after the break, we're going to review and discuss all of the recommendations. Does that work?
Okay, thank you. A great, robust discussion. We really appreciate it. Some great ideas. Eugene, I'm going to see you for the development of that app right after this meeting. So I appreciate you stepping in and taking that on.
Volunteering?
So, okay. Again, appreciate it. Next slides. Okay. Okay, one more. Okay, this next topic is how can we improve the timelines for DORS services? So we kind of want to give you a little bit of an idea of what we deal with as far as sort of the input, as far as the volume of work that we deal with. It all starts with the referral. And so this past year, calendar year, up through the 29th, so we tried to give you as current information. DORS received 8,718 VR referrals. Of that, only about 4,562 actually moved into applications. In addition to that, DORS has received 3,919 pre-employment referrals, of which only 1,520, or about 39%, have moved forward to services. And we received the documentation necessary for us to move forward. Some of the reasons why there's a drop-off between the referrals and the application. In some cases, it's the lack of family support to assist in following through with the necessary documentation. Individual may not be connected to a community provider who can either provide the information or assist the individual in following up in the necessary documentation. They're not interested in actually pursuing either VR or pre-employment. Somebody may have done the referral for them, but it was just something they answered yes to, but they really have no interest in actually moving forward. Because we use an electronic online referrals system, inaccurate information is entered into the referral form, and so unfortunately the information does not get sent to the proper location. And we also sometimes get duplicate referrals. Schools for IEP, for pre-ETs, constantly, they send one at the beginning of the year, send another one at the end of the year, send one following the next school year. So sometimes we've already got them in the system, we're already doing something, but the information keeps on coming. Okay, next. Now, for the timelines, timelines to provide VR services. The federal requirements, and again, we kind of reviewed this earlier, VR agency has 60 days to make an eligibility decision once we receive that application. In FY22, DORS is making those eligibility decisions in about 37 days on average. 96.1% of all VR eligible decisions by DORS is made within 60 days. The national average is around 94.6. The VR agency has 90 days to develop an individual plan for employment once they've been determined eligible for services and the individual is not put on the DORS wait list. In FY22, DORS developed our plans within 66 days on average. Overall, we did this task 94.3% of the time, while the national average is around 95.5. So we're a little behind the curve on this one. But just to kind of give you an idea of what we were facing with, DORS had between 38 to 43 vacant counselor and supervisory positions this year. So, which really puts a heavy workload on the remaining staff. One of the factors, obviously, when it comes to making an eligibility determination is being able to access current medical documentation in order to make the correct decision. One of the things we do when we partner with the Behavioral Health Administration, BHA actually provides us access into their own case management system so we can pull current medical information. With the proper documentation, we can make a decision in 23 days and in 31 days to move that individual into a plan. If an individual who applies for VR services but does not have sufficient medical documentation, DORS will need to obtain a medical assessment before making eligibility. Without the proper documentation, it takes us 51 days to make that eligibility decision and 63 days to move them into a plan, determined eligible.
Eugene?
Real quick, when you just said, this is, I don't want to say stunning, but DORS counselors access into case managers to pull current medical information would be, so there is a mechanism in place for us.
For only for BHA.
So we can't duplicate that process to get agreements.
Well, as long as there's individual agreements in place, that's the key here. You've got to have, we just don't show up on BHA's doorstep.
Oh, I agree. And that's why I said, because
They're
if that's able to be done, I mean, there's a template in place for it to happen.
Oh, no, we're not saying that by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, there is a template. I mean, obviously the information has to be available and it has to be available so that we can access it. And depending upon who the party is, sometimes you can make it accessible and sometimes you can't. You know, in some cases there are very strict, I'm going to say, there's a lot of restrictions on how that information is used. Yeah.
And Scott, just to clarify, this is for VR, which would encompass some students as well as adults. It's not just the student population.
No,
and with BHA, it's primarily an adult population, which I know has some factors as well in terms of that individual consent and so
Right.
forth. But so just to clarify, because I think it does get confusing sometimes when we switch in and out of pre-ETS versus VR. So I want to make certain that everybody knows that this data that you're talking about right now is VR eligibility.
Right. So, next slide. The other factors that influence this time, kind of give you an idea of how we stack up against the rest of the nation. The average VR counselor workload in states around the country is between 85 and 100. North Carolina, shout out there to Renee there for a second, has an average caseload of 60 for their VR counselors. Currently, DORS active caseload is around 137. When we add in the delayed caseloads, it jumps to 150. So this is a range of between 37 and 61% higher than most agencies across the nation. To meet the national average, and again, this I'm going to kind of address a little bit here, Ellen's question that was raised last time as well as in this session, what would it take for us to get to that national average? DORS would need at least 60 new pen positions to support the workload and get us down to what the other states in the country are doing. Now, if we want to be aggressive, we can get it down to 60 and ask for 188 positions to support that workload. And these are counselors, just the counseling positions.
And Scott, that's not adding additional roles and responsibilities.
No, that's
some of
just
the
that's
positions
just
that
the
we're
VR
talking about
count.
today. This is just doing
What
what the minimum is, not sort of what we'd like to see in terms of a vision and so forth. And this is, again, just VR, not the pre-eds.
Well, this would be the entire caseload.
Okay,
So
so
it
this
is would,
does
this would
include
address both VR
Okay,
and
thank
pre-eds.
you.
This is our entire,
Okay.
this is
Thank
what
you
it would
for that
take.
clarification.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
You're welcome. And I appreciate you asking that question. So, yes.
And I don't know, you may not have the numbers now, I see the percentages, but is North Carolina referring at the same rate as the state of Maryland?
I can't say. I mean, I'm not sure what North Carolina is referring, but I mean, what you have to kind of look at is what is their case, what they're advertising, and they put out.
Oh, yeah, I get it, but again, that can be if we're over referring possibly, and they may be under referring, that could be.
It could very well be, Eugene. I mean, it is a legitimate question, whether or not, states are aggressively pursuing getting referrals. And it also sometimes also depends upon, again, how that agency works with its other other agencies. It is a legitimate question. Can't speak to it, with any authority.
Scott, Lillian has a question. Looking at pre-COVID shutdowns and significant changes in employee departures, was DORS staffing comparable? And were caseloads comparable to other states? And then Stephanie, did you have a question?
No, I mean, we were struggling before COVID. I mean, we were having, our transitioning counselors, pre-COVID, post-COVID, even during COVID, we're carrying caseloads of between 250 and 300. I have to give my hats off to our staff down in the Prince George's and Montgomery County areas, because they're the ones that were carrying those sizable caseloads. Yeah.
There was one comment I thought was important to say. Make sure that we're talking about all doors, not just.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think-
Yeah, I mean, we're talking, just to clarify the one comment in the chat, yeah, again, and I think it addresses Jade's question, we addressed it. This is the entire caseload, both pre-ETS and VR, that would take us.
Scott, would that also then get at eliminating the waiting list, or would that
That would
require-
include eliminating the wait list.
Thank you.
Right.
I think that the commission should recommend an increase in DORS budget in order to reduce the caseloads to 60. Thank you, Ellen.
I like that, Ellen, thank you. So, next slide. But to kind of give you an idea of what it would take, again, what this slide represents is 60 counselors, but it also is picking up on some of the discussion from some of the previous sessions that we have about how can we expand services further out into the community. So this is just a brief snapshot of what we'd be looking at. For 60 counselors, we're looking at about 4.8 million, and that would cover both salaries and benefits. To expand services, some of the stuff that we do at the Workforce and Technology, we're looking at 14 individuals to expand those services at a rate of 1.5 for a total of 6,377,000.
Scott, is this in addition to the data numbers that you had shared previously about maintenance of effort, or would this be inclusive of that?
Well, it depends upon how these positions are funded.
Okay.
So if we were to say, okay, it's a traditional 80-20 split, then 20% of 6.3 would be state funds, which would then go towards match and maintenance of effort. The rest of it would then come out of federal funds. If somebody wants to give me 6.3 million in state funding, I'll take it. Don't worry about it. That will last. That'll set the division up nicely for a number of years as our grant increases, and so forth. So, but that's the estimated cost, based on current salaries.
Megan?
just wanted to make a comment about the way that we're talking about pre-employment transition services. I know, and this is a little off topic because it's not specifically a consideration for the commission, but in looking at the way that pre-employment transition services are discussed in Maryland, I think there's been a framing over the past several years that sort of blames feels like a harsh word, but like blames pre-employment transition services for our wait list and kind of I just want to be careful about the way that we're talking about these and considering them, because they are important services. They're required because they're sort of an early intervention, or meant to be, for high school students to help make sure that these students have a greater chance of entering the workforce, and they're required in recognition of the fact that they make employment outcomes more, or make employment outcomes, successful employment outcomes, more likely for students who receive them. So they're really valuable services, and I sort of cringe every time I hear us talking about them the way that, like that they're something that's preventing better or more services from being provided. And if it's, I understand that, money is limited and that the more services we're required to provide with the same amount of money, something has to give, but they are important services too. And so when we're talking about like pre-employment transition services versus the traditional DORS services, I just don't want their importance to be lost.
No, it's an excellent observation, and I appreciate it. And just to let everybody know, if an individual is determined eligible for VR services, they're still eligible for pre-employment. They actually will get more services under VR, because not only can they get the pre-employment services, but they can also get wraparound services that will help them, support them in that training. Under pre-employment, it is a very specific, those 5 services that we discussed, that's all we can provide. We can't provide any type of wraparound services to help that individual, whether it be in a work-based learning experience, whether it's in a job shadowing experience, or anything else that might assist them. And so, that's why this is really important, is to get at the category 2. And again, Ellen, I think you brought it up last time, that how do we clear what's the number that we need to handle significant and most significant? I'll just be blunt, under no circumstances should we ever think about doing away with the order selection. Because the moment we open up order selection and say we're going to do away with it, and please understand, there are states out there with no order selection. What that opens you up to is having individuals who have non-severe disabilities. And we kind of went through that, and we're going to go through it again here a little bit later. So it's really clear that we focus on significant and most significant disabilities when we ask for these positions. And again, those students who, if they apply for VR services and are not determined significant, they'll still get pre-employment. Don't get me wrong, they're still eligible for that. They may have a disability, but they may not rise to the level of a significant disability. They'll still get those, can still get those services.
So, in addition to an actual financial return on investments, meaning one of the things, and probably every member of this commission knows it, is that every human being with disabilities, has this incredible potential. And I've seen it, probably we all have, in our families and our clients and whatever. So that not only are we talking about happier, more joyful human beings who feel like they're part of our communities, but we also have tax-paying citizens who buy things, who earn money, who, aren't, because, it's been described as kind of falling off a cliff once you're out of special education. It was mentioned earlier, IDEA is an absolute entitlement. And once you get into, DORS, once you get out of that, you're in eligibility. And eligibility means if the funds are there and you're eligible, you get the services. But if the funds aren't there, you will be on a waiting list. But you've been found to be eligible, but you may not get it. So I think when we are making the case in the report, as much as we can talk about that this is actually a fiscally responsible move for Maryland to invest in these human beings, not only to make their lives better, but also they will be tax-paying citizens of the state of Maryland. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. Okay. Lillian said, so if you were to right size, sorry, I'm reading on two different screens, thank you. If you were the right size, then you could provide funding requests to reduce the caseloads, clear up the background wait lists, and bearing unusual circumstances prevent future wait lists. I think we have to request what we feel is needed, but sound justification would have to underpin the ask. Asking for money willy-nilly is not sound. And then I don't think anyone is saying pre-ets aren't important. However, ensuring all aspects of DORS are considered and addressed are important, since those are more intensive services for students exiting school as well as others.
Absolutely.
Let me see.
Okay.
Eugene,
Just real quick, even if we ask for more money, we have to make sure that the vendors that actually provide pre-ets or VR services are of quality. So we can get all the money in the world, but if we don't have quality services and a return on that investment, that the students are making progress or meeting outcomes, then it's just money wasted. So we got to make sure we address that end of the spectrum as well.
Yep. You're absolutely
you.
right. Thank you. Next slide.
And I was going to say, just to piggyback on that, and then we're still going to have very dissatisfied families, very frustrated families, very frustrated young adults with disabilities as well.
Yeah, and you'll see that here in a minute. Okay, again, some of the factors, some of these we've already kind of gone over. Again, that can influence the time of getting services. Again, the lack of family support. And again, when I talk about family, I mean this, it's, not only pre-ets, but it's also VR, where you can have, family who's not supportive of that individual going to work. Again, not connected to a community provider to help them obtain the necessary documentation. Not to beat up on the Postal Service, but again, the U.S. mail. I mean, it takes 2 or 3 weeks or more to mail stuff back and forth during the overall process. Provider circumstances. Speaking, Gene, you must have skipped ahead. I see. Yeah. So, but Eugene's right. I mean, right at the moment, providers are under a lot of pressure. A lot of them have created wait lists now. They're short-staffed. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, state agencies are scrambling to try to find, individuals to fill their positions. Private industry is trying to find individuals to fill positions. So this is not just a isolated incident. Some providers are limiting the number of in-person services they're providing. Thereby, if an individual wants to provide, wants in person, again, they're going to be a part of a wait list until that provider can get to it. Just to kind of give you an idea. Go ahead, Jake.
Sure. I think that thinking back on our discussion of transparency and accountability, I think that some of these are data points that DORS should be pushing out, right? I mean, on a regular basis, so that everyone can see, these how many people we put out, and so forth, because, this is shocking, and it also impedes your ability, and then the next question is, how do we what do we need to do to, to address some of these things and so forth. But I do think that more transparency around some of the data things that you're sharing with the commission on an ongoing basis would be really helpful to understand that it's not like you guys are just sitting there twiddling your thumbs, like, and not being accountable. Yeah, I mean, I know you don't have time, because I think that it highlights that the solutions aren't, we can't look to you guys to fix everything. It's going to have to be a collaborative effort if we're going to improve the things that individuals are concerned about.
Right. And again, and this next bullet point kind of speaks to both what Renee and Eugene were talking about. This past year, between July and September 30th, we issued over close to 3,000 authorizations to providers and vendors around the state for both vocational and rehabilitation services. As of basically yesterday, we still had 1,797 authorizations in which we have received no documentation that services have been provided yet. Now, services may have been provided yesterday, we haven't got the bill yet, but that you can see well over half have not yet provided us any documentation that they've provided the services at this point in time. So yeah, it can be frustrating in the fact that we're, almost, in some cases, 6 months.
Scott Allen is asking, is there any additional funding available for DORS under the blueprint for Maryland's future, formerly known as the Curran Commission?
I don't, we're not mentioned in the blueprint, and so I don't think we're going to be entitled to have any funding under blueprint, but it's something we can certainly look into to see whether or not there may be some additional funding. Again, at the moment, as long as we continue to meet the match and the maintenance.
It says that it's for the creation and expansion of career and technical educational programs. So that's the headlines. I don't have the commission report in front of me, but the headlines of it say that it includes career and technical education programs. So
Yeah,
I just
and
want to.
no, and I appreciate you bringing it up. We will take a look at it and see whether or not.
Well, just to be clear, that refers to basically federal funding for programs that are called career and technical education. Now, I know that there's a lot of work going on to ensure that kids in special ed are having access. There's a dashboard now that's available about career and tech ed that highlights the number of students with disabilities as well as some other criteria and so forth. But that CTE funding is a different funding stream and for different programming than the Division of Rehabilitation Services. So I don't want those to be conflated. So.
Thank you. And Ellen, Megan has a question, but for Ellen, Dr. Lawson says she is checking. Megan?
Yes, my question was about the services that have been authorized that there's no record of provision yet. Can you speak generally about what types of, are we talking workforce training?
We're talking all types, unfortunately. I mean, it's a broad spectrum. I mean, I didn't dig into specifics of exactly which ones, other than to take a quick review of who the vendor or providers were, and it was a broad spectrum. It wasn't just certain providers. They're just not providing. It's a number of them. So
I'm wondering if one thing the reason I ask is I'm wondering if one thing we might look at towards a recommendation is whether any of those services could be done like in-house if we are brought on staff in-house to provide them. Like, would that be a way to ensure service provision? Would any of them be appropriate to do in-house, and what the possibility is? So I don't know if we could look at maybe more closely at what those services are and what the providers are, and whether there's any benefit towards working towards keeping some of the training and programming in-house as opposed to through a partnership.
Yeah, this is Jody. I can respond to that a little bit. I've looked at a lot of the lists that's got provided. This ranges anywhere from psychological evaluations to job development, job coaching, some pre-ET services. I mean, it is across the board. But part of the issue, like for the psychological assessments, Maryland is critically short on psychologists. And, you know, if they can be in private practice, they're going to make a whole lot more money than what they can make working for DORS doing psychological evaluation. So that's what they're choosing to do. And the same is true for job coaching, job development. Our community rehab providers are struggling to hire people, people that are qualified to do the work. And I think, you know, statewide, that's you can go out to a restaurant or a grocery store and you can see that they're short-staffed. That's true across the board, no matter what the profession is. So I think that's a major part of it. That's the feedback that I'm receiving so far. Our regional directors are following up on those authorizations to see what the delays are, and that's mainly what they're hearing now, that there are wait lists, that they don't have the staff to provide it. They can't get to providing those services because they don't have the individuals to provide the services in a lot of the cases. I can't say it's all the cases, but in many of them.
Yeah. And also to speak to that, one of the things that we've done this year to help with the providers and their costs is we've increased our fees to the providers. We had a fee increase in July, and then we're going to have another fee increase in January. Again, recognizing that the inflation costs are at this, historic highs at the moment, compared to, what they've been for the last 4 to 5 years. So we're trying to assist in that area by increasing the funding allocation to the provider community. Okay. Improvements that DORS has been making. Again, we recognize that how quickly we can get to an individual really doesn't impact whether or not there is a need for service. They will want to go to work and so forth. In December of 2020, prior to that, we were on a paper referral system, which means that somebody would mail us a referral, bring in a paper referral, and it would go to a secretary who was answering the phones, paying the bills, working with the clients that were coming in the office, and, oh, by the way, entering referrals into the case management system. And sometimes that work, depending on the size of the office, took weeks after the individual dropped off their referral. We moved to a complete electronic online referral systems, and nowadays we are mailing the packages of information within 2 business days after receiving that referral. The other issue we've talked about is staffing. And so the superintendent, when he first came on board, he and I met, and we talked about some of the issues facing the division at the time. And as we've talked about, he tasked the senior management of the Maryland State Department of Education, as well as the Division of Rehabilitation Services, to do a salary survey. And so as a result of that work, we were able to give our counselors approximately a 20% increase, which is 2 grades and 4 steps. Above that, we increased our starting wage from $42,000 to $54,000, as well as the state employees also got an additional 4.5% starting on November 1st this past year. Kind of give you a little bit of perspective. In July, we had 56 vacancies and 13 individuals pending hiring. As of November 30th, DORS was down to 33 vacancies with 10 pending. And out of those 33 vacancies, that's the VR program wide, only 7 of those are VR counselor positions. Again, on February 1st, we began our eligibility determination unit, which allows those VR counselors to solely focus on determining eligibility of the VR services or determining whether students with disabilities qualify for pre-employment. In addition to that, on August 1st, we entered into an agreement with the University of Maryland Center on Transitioning Career Innovation to assist in helping the EDU eligibility determination unit handle that portion of the workload for pre-ETs that can be delegated out. This partnership helps with connecting the students and the families quicker. The most recent data from the start of the partnership is showing that 55% of the pre-employment referrals have submitted their necessary data, compared to 39% previously, prior to the start of this initiative. So we are seeing improvements. We are seeing some of that hand-holding and getting the parents the necessary information and taking the time with them to explain it is starting to pay off. The other thing that we've done over the last couple of years is implementing visualization tools for not only for management but also for staff to manage their caseloads. This is an example of one, and it kind of allows us to kind of keep track of who's doing what, where, and when. This information gets down to the actual caseload of the individuals, so if we have issues, we can, it kind of jumps off the page at you, and we're able to then start digging into those cases and find out what's going on. Additionally, and again, I saw this come up in the chat, actually, we have begun, we've implemented an electronic signature folder, which is being first rolled out in our eligibility determination unit. Then it's our Office of Blindness and Vision Services, and then our Office of Field Services. This will allow our counselors to put together documents that need to be signed and electronically send them to the individual. They can sign off a computer, off their phone, off their pad, what have you, and send it immediately back to us. We have the initial feedback that we're getting from both staff and clients is very positive on this. The other thing that we're going to do is try to eliminate as much as possible mailing of documents. And so one of the other areas that we're going to be doing after the first of the year is for those individuals who are receiving those referral application packets, instead of mailing them out, once we get that referral, we'll be sending out the information to them in an email, and so they can access it probably within a day after sending their referrals in. So again, we're trying to streamline this and reduce as much as possible when it comes to dealing with paper. The other thing that we're excited about, and again, sort of what Eugene's talked about a little bit, but this will be mainly internal, is a bi-directional communication system and using texting. The majority of our clients, once we consider the pre-employments as well as the VR clients, are all under the age of 24. They don't answer the phone, they don't read mail. So we're going to start texting. We did a pilot of this this past summer with some of the documents we needed for our federal reporting, and literally within, we needed to get wage data from individuals and graduation information from individuals, and we sent it out, and literally within 20 to 30 minutes, we had about 15 to 20 responses. So this is a way of communicating and going forward. This is a system that it has to go through procurement, and we'll be hoping to have this procured and approved by hopefully in January. Okay. So after we've talked a lot, so if there's any additional strategies or resources you think we can do to help reduce the time frame, welcome to it.
So, Scott, question. I love the emailing, and I think Marlo knows where my question is going, and I love that, right? Snail mailing is just the bane of an existence for a family. So my question is, though, is there I think this is piggybacking on this consent piece that Eugene brought up, is y'all's encrypted emails are hard for families. They are very, very, very difficult. Oh, yep. And so I would really urge that there is some way you guys could do something to stop encrypting these emails. They are horrible. And then that's one recommendation. My second is a question. So when you tested the texting, did you also test that with families?
Well, this particular time, we were looking strictly to gather documents for the federal reporting. So that's what we kind of focused on, was just that group of individuals.
Gotcha.
We haven't gone out and done testing broadly around families and so forth.
Okay.
Primarily because we're still working through sort of the nuances
Right.
of this.
Okay.
And making sure that, you know, how it's done makes sense, because again, we're using the state's testing system at the texting system at the moment, and it limits us to the number of characters. So there's a lot of, okay, how do we make this clear
Yes.
in less than 50 words?
Well, that's even worse than Twitter.
So it's kind of taken us, we've kind of developed some workarounds, and that's what we've been trying to test and so forth, and which is why the bi-directional one we're hoping will free us up as far as sort of that limitation. But that's part of the other, part of the issue. But Priyats, yeah, we recognize that, we've got to get there with texting, because that's where everybody's at and so forth. Unfortunately, Virtue is a state system. We can't control that. Now, with that said, what we've tried to do is do some workarounds. We do have portals in which individuals can securely load information up to that, and we also provide them, said, hey, listen, there's a document, click on this link and it takes you to a secure location to pull down the documents. So we're trying to work through some of that as well, to try to eliminate the use of Virtue, because we use Virtue internally, and it's not the best product, and especially for individuals who are blind, it's not accessible at all.
Yeah,
So we try to use it in as limited situations as possible.
And for me, as a mom, it's not even the texting. If the emails, when it's encrypted, and I understand we have to work on that system, but my recommendation would definitely be a way to find a way around it, because if I really want to respond, I want that application in, and I'm on my work email, but the email was sent to my personal email, then it won't read each other. Right. So I would prefer email over text sometimes, but the emails then don't talk to each other. So it is, it can be very frustrating for some families. And then we had Shanika said, is there a way to make the application electronic as you did with the referral? I feel that the online referral system made the process so much easier. I am optimistic that an electronic application process would do the same. And then Lillian, Megan agrees, and Lillian said at CCBC we are faced with the same thing. Even with text, you have to get to the point within a certain amount of characters, and the number is low. Maybe develop a portal for families to apply, similar to how most companies have you apply for employment, where relevant attachments can be uploaded, and agree with the encrypted emails are a nightmare for families.
Yeah.
A encrypted email are a nightmare for families. Encrypted emails are a nightmare for families.
Louder for the people in the back.
Stephanie.
I would like to make the recommendation that since when you're going to the, and this sounds great, to texting and more modern, I don't know, that's not the right, contemporary forms of communication, that you also do a social media blast, that's what you're doing. Because if you're sending a text message and I don't know who you are, I'm not going to look at that either. So if people know about it and you've done your social media blast, as well as inform the in-school people who say, now be looking for this text message, they're going to communicate with you by then. People will be more apt to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What we do now, especially because of the character limit, is we send out a short text saying, this is the Maryland State Department of Education, Division of Rehabilitation Services. You will be receiving a text in a few moments to request information. So then they get a second one. So then they're like, oh, okay, now I know who this is. So that helps. That definitely helps. But as far as the emails, we do have the portals, and it's usually on the bottom. Sorry, I can't see you guys. It's usually on the bottom of an email. So if you receive an email requesting information, there will be a portal link on the bottom of that email where information, confidential information, can be sent without having to use Virtru. So we just had our signatures updated today, and I realized the portal link was not on there. So I'm gonna have to remind everyone, that just happened this morning, to add the portal links to the email signature line. We received a kind of a MSDE new signature line, and it doesn't have the portal. So we'll add that to it. But we do have that ability to not use Virtru by sending the documents, anything confidential, through the portals. And let me just address the applications. We would also love to have electronic applications. With the current system that we have, the AWARE electronic case management system, it's very picky about things as apostrophes and semicolons and that type of thing. It really doesn't work well with that. So I think we're constantly looking for a way to do that, but we haven't found the solution at this point in time. So, yeah.
Eugene, and if that's okay, I was going to say, and then we're going to Eugene, and then we're going to take a break.
Two quick things. Whatever application or mechanism you come up with, can we try to incorporate the state ID number as part of the application process? That way, if we begin to share data, we have a unique way of sharing that, particularly with MSDE, and hopefully some integration with Maryland Online. Other suggestion, I don't know legalese around it, but I'll throw the idea out there for at least pre-ET services. Since there is a limited number of case providers, our Maryland educators are wonderful, who would probably are more than qualified with some training to provide pre-ET services outside of the school day. So if we can consider training a cadre statewide of teachers with the recommendation of principals and superintendents, and maybe as a safeguard that you can't serve students within your LEA, but maybe outside of your LEA to prevent a potential conflict of interest or whatever, and have the teachers as individual vendors bill back to DORS for services rendered for pre-ETs at least.
Yeah, that's a
good idea.
Yeah, that's a great model, and we do that a lot in the summer. So a lot of our summer youth programs, the individuals that work as the job coaches or job developers are actually from the school systems, and they work throughout the summer. But yeah, they might be interested in part-time employment outside of school if they have the energy.
Shannon.
Going over here, but I truly believe that pre-ETs need to be taught by persons with disabilities. It's very important that they be taught by persons with disabilities.
Maybe, no, as part of the current process, does DORS ask what the preferred method of communication the individual would like? Yes. So yes, the answer is yes.
Yes.
And right now, it's 2:20. We are going to take a break until 2:30? Until 2:30. So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to look at all the recommendations so we can get ready for our intern report.
Recording in progress.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. And we've got 6 topics we've already had some discussion on. So included in your package is for topic 1, the methods for improving stakeholder. These are the recommendations based off of going back and listening to and reading the chats and so forth. And in some cases where there were similar type of recommendations, but with just different organizations, I try to combine those in under one single recommendation versus having 2 pages worth of recommendations that sort of repeated themselves. So I'm not sure whether you guys want me to read them to you or whether you all want to take a minute or two to kind of review them and see if there's any further discussion.
I read them before the meeting and they look great to me. The one that we talked about extensively this earlier today is adding in a pre-IEP meeting with family members and student as appropriate with a trusted member of the team. Does not need to be a DORS person. You just need someone who is knowledgeable about DORS and transitioning, so that would support kind of that last bullet, the plain language. So that conversation would be a chance in plain language to talk with family members and students when it's appropriate. It's not always appropriate, and talk about transition and DORS services. So that was a recommendation that I think everybody sounded like was supportive of earlier today.
Okay. Any other recommendations for topic number 1?
Yes. You know, by the last commission meeting, I am going to figure this microphone out. I apologize. So the dissemination of transitioning information through the local education agency transition coordinators. I wonder if there's a way that we can broaden that, given that IEP chairs are doing a lot of the transition post-school outcomes, transition goals, everything. If there's a way of expanding that somehow, that information or the formalization of the communication piece about that, because again, IEP chairs.
It should be someone knowledgeable, so that we don't use the term, we can say transition coordinator or an individual knowledgeable about DORS and transition services.
I guess I'm a little confused.
My concern is with this particular method of improving stakeholder input is that that the information may get stuck, and just, is there a way that, because IEP chairs may or may not understand transition, but they're doing transition, right? Or they may or may not understand DORS, or may not understand pre-ETS or VR services or DDA or which I know that's out of the purview of the commission, but.
Right, and I think that's one of the challenges, and that's what's lending to my confusion.
Yeah.
What is within our realm? What can DORS do versus what are things that may be things that we'd like to see but aren't under the purview of DORS? And so the methods of improving stakeholder input for the purposes of this are how is DORS getting information out and to who, and how is it getting in the hands of family members, correct?
Yeah, because right now the way that reads, unless I'm reading it wrong, is that it looks like it's only going to transition coordinators at the school building. And so,
And so it's dissemination of transitioning information through the LEAs, including transition coordinators, to families and individuals, right?
Yeah.
That's the piece that's missing, and that's the piece that DORS can control, is DORS can partner with them to try and get that information out in a more consistent or coordinated manner, or I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
but
But I see your point.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I do want you guys to be able to do what's in your control, because we can't make early intervention and special education do stuff as a part of this commission. So I'm really clear about that. Does that am I making sense? Okay, thanks.
I think you're making sense. I think what you're saying is, instead of limiting it to just saying through the LEA transition coordinators, you're looking at through like the transition staff as a whole, whoever is part of transition at that school.
I'd also broaden it to say, like, because the point of it is to get better information in the hands of families and individuals. The LEAs and the transition coordinators are some elements of that, but I'd say, maybe mapping out to and to figure out what the best ways are to get transition information through the LEAs and their transition staff into the hands of families.
Comment or question?
So
Is
there's
there-
two different communications that we're talking about. One is wanting to make sure that families and the students with disabilities understand what's available and have a clear communication about that. The other piece of this is whoever at the school level is dealing with transition issues, whether that be somebody called a transition coordinator, an IEP chair, a mental health counselor, or whatever, that they also get that information because things change, and they are also stakeholders because they have a stake in the success of their students learning how to be, learning about transition and being prepared for employment. So there's also communication from those local school stakeholders back to DORS to say, hey, this is what's working here for our families. Here's more information I need. So like for this commission, one of the things that I've done to prepare was to talk to local school people about this, and I've gotten lots of good feedback about things that they would like to know that's not clear. So that communication is also stakeholder input from the people who are actually trying to do this work in the school with their students, so that DORS understands what their needs are. And one of the questions that I was asked was something as simple as they didn't understand the process of transitioning from pre-employment services to VR. They said it was unclear. Anyway, they go on. So I think there's a lot of good information, good stakeholder input from school staff members, both public and non-public, that can help DORS provide better services. So, anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. If you're not speaking, can you remember to mute yourself? We're getting some feedback, please. Thanks. I thought that the individual we were originally reconnecting, recommending dissemination, the information to the schools was a DORS employee who was working with the LEAs. School counselors need the information as they have conversation with students with disabilities on their caseloads. Yes, the guidance in addition to IEP chairs and transition specialists, I guess special educators. So then my question is, we've taken enough notes to add to that? Because the conversation seems to be around the two-way communication at the LEAs.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Is there any other comments on this particular topic? Okay, yeah, we'll add this information into the overall recommendations for this particular topic, so thank you very much.
Just have a question. Does everybody agree that, that the actual school staff members are also stakeholders? Because I wanted to make sure that that recommendation includes getting input from, and there were some things in the chat from, mental health counselors, from other people working with students with disabilities. So I just wanted to make sure that in that recommendation, if everybody agrees, that we clarify that we know stakeholders obviously are families, the individuals with disabilities, but also the people who are providing, services in schools.
Okay, yeah, we can add school staff who work with individuals with disabilities.
Isn't that covered under the two-way communication at the LEA level about services that are being provided by DORS? That's what I had read that to mean, so maybe it just needs some additional language that clarifies that, but I had viewed that as sort of
Okay.
an interactive process of sharing information and feedback back and forth.
I can
I
add
think
that.
just clarifying that the stakeholders is a big tent. There's a lot of stakeholders.
So maybe adding two-way communication across the multiple stakeholders at the LEA level about services being provided by DORS. And if we want, we can be prescriptive and put guidance, IEP.
For example, yeah, because we're never going to think of
Right,
everybody.
exactly. That's, yeah.
Okay. All right. Writing as fast as I can. Okay, the next one is topic number 2. How can Developmental Disabilities Administration and the Division of Rehabilitation Services improve their working relationship? Last time we had a presentation on this, and even though we expanded the time frame, we still ran short on time. So we had a very limited discussion, so here's our opportunity to kind of go back. I went back through the slide presentations, and these were sort of some of the key takeaways from that. And so, again, if you've had time to read it, we can open up for discussion, because based on what I kind of saw, other than sort of, I'm going to say self-reporting that came from both DORS and DDA, is, review of opportunities for improvement. So we either can make some of these as recommendations, or we can do others.
So these all look good. The earlier discussion about a kind of a my chart, so that DDA, I mean, obviously with permission of the individual with a disability, that DDA and DORS can communicate, share records, electronically, just to make it seamless. Because I know when I work with clients to help them with their DDA applications, we put in a lot of information, and we attach all these different medical reports and psychological and speech and language. And if the individual with a disability consented, then DORS would have access to the, all those, data points, all those reports, and also, the limitations that the individual and his or her families sees in different, parts of their life.
Okay.
So, in my conversations with providers, I know one of the things that they cite as a reason why they don't want to partner with DORS is because they feel like there's a lot more administrative expectations, and I know that those are federally required. So I struggle with what is the solution when there's differing standards. And I think what happens, and Stephanie, maybe you can, maybe you have more insight onto this, but, is they just do it under DDA funding, because there's more flexibility, at least currently, although I know that the DDA system is changing. So I feel like this is one of these areas that we're not going to be able to really solve within the context of this work group. But I think trying to figure out, is there a way to better align so that there's more standardization of expectations, documentation, whatever it is, to make it easier without sort of compromising the outcomes that you guys need, and what that process is. I mean, I was shocked to see the low number of DDA referrals. And I don't know that that necessarily aligns, because DDA status says that we're doing really good in terms of getting employment outcomes. So, so I think that that needs to be a deeper dive to understand what those disconnects are and what, if anything, because it may be that things can't just be changed, is it that, that DDA needs to take a harder stance in ensuring that they're accessing DORS funding? Will the changes to LTSS ultimately result in something that more aligns with, DORS and so forth? But I think that, but I feel like that's a scope and discussion that we don't have the knowledge or expertise around the table to have those conversations.
I mean, I'll say one thing, sort of the difference between the two organizations. BHA, in order to become a provider of employment services, you are required to be a DORS vendor, and you are required to access our services first for employment services. And if you don't provide those employment services for DORS, then they run the risk of losing their licensure for providing employment services.
Interesting.
But I appreciate that. I mean, the looking at documentation, we just actually went through that for the umpteenth time again, looking at where we can streamline processes and so forth, and make it easier. Because again, we're not. I mean, it's not only the DDA providers; it's all the providers, BHA, DDA, private, and so forth. At the same time, meeting sort of that federal mandated requirement is, did you get what you paid for requirement? Because again, they come in, they take a look and say, okay, they provide job coaching. Let's see the documentation to support this invoice. And so if the policy says you need to do X, Y, and Z, they're pulling that invoice, pulling the policy, and seeing if X, Y, and Z were done. So yeah, it's sort of a.
You guys are, this is another example where, like, there's limits to what you all can control that may drive the ability to, improve or increase the DDA numbers, because you can't modify your federal documentation requirements. So, I mean, that's why I feel like, we're limited in terms of what we can do, because it's going to take a partnership in both sides. And I think your BHA example is a great example. Now, I know that there would be a lot of resistance, to that as it, but I think we can't hold you solely responsible, DORS, in terms of this, recognizing some of the differences across the system.
Yeah, and I mean, recognizing that BHA, Behavioral Health Administration, and the Developmental Disability Administration are two different organizations and operate under two different sets of rules and regulations. And so just because BHA does it that way is not saying that DDA has to do it, because what they're tasked to do is completely different than what Behavioral Health Administration is tasked to do. So, but I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments concerning DDA and DORS? I do want to at least point out, and again, we talked about the MOU. Let me just give you a couple quick aspects of that. Just so you know, one, if you're interested in it, it is on our DORS website under information, resources, and so forth, towards the bottom of the page. So it is there for you to take a look at. But one of the things that it does spell out for both DORS and DDA is the fact that we will meet on a regular basis and discuss these issues on a regular basis. It's really sort of a quarterly set up to be quarterly meetings. Now, unfortunately, the pandemic threw a monkey wrench into everything, and because everybody was trying to just get by and try to adjust to the new environment that we faced, those meetings were suspended during that period of time. However, we are meeting. We've got meetings scheduled going forward, and these are some of the things that we'll be looking at, is to see where we can potentially streamline our requirements based on what DDA already requires in some of their stuff. So we'll continue to look at this and try to find out ways to make it a little bit easier and encourage providers to work with us. Again, one of the other things I think will help is this increase that we'll be seeing in January brings our fee schedule a little bit closer in alignment with BHA's fee schedule.
Scott, I just wanted to add too, I think the part of the numbers being low is the wait lists for DORS services. So when a DDA provider begins, because people are in the pre-employment services, so they may find a job within that time, and
Right.
they reach out to DORS, and because of the wait list, it may be better for the individual to go ahead and for their provider to go ahead
Right.
and establish services for them.
And BHA has the same provision that in the event that an individual gets put on a wait list, then BHA will step in then the provider is free to move forward with that employment services BHA will pay for.
Ellen?
Thank you. So I had a question, and I haven't memorized all the slides, so I could be getting this wrong, but didn't we have slides a couple meetings ago that said a lot of the DDA clients were centers-based in terms of employment, and that not a lot of them were in competitive integrated employment, or am I misremembering that slide?
Well, I think their employments, for those who were employed, I believe they were, if my recollection, and I should because I've been writing this section of based off of those slides. For those individuals who were employed, the highest percentage were people who had individual employment, then followed by those who were in a group setting, and then followed by, I think they were employed by the facility itself. But the highest percentages were individuals who were in either facility-based non-paid work or community-based non-paid work.
Right, and so my question would be, so if I'm a DDA community provider and I'm working with an individual, and like one example, one of my clients, her non-paid employment was going with a staff member delivering mail around the campus. Now, the benefit to her was she got to have some social interaction and she got out of the residence, but I don't think she was really learning anything new. And so if I'm the staff member and we're having one of the individualized program planning meetings, how do I know when I should refer to DORS? And what is the criteria for doing that? And do DDA staff members know, this is the trigger, this is when I, think that this young woman delivering the mail around the campus of the facility, that she could really have, maybe it might be part-time, competitive integrated employment.
It would be based on what that person and their team desire for that person. So if they say, I want to see if I can turn this into a paid opportunity, at that time the referral would be made and the process would be, the plan would be updated to reflect the individual's wishes for their life. Also wanted to note as well, just so everybody knows, that a little bit of those numbers, yeah, I just want to note though, before I answer the second part of your question, is that some of those numbers, people can be in more than one activity. So you can have a paid job on some days and have to go to a non-paid activity on other days. So the numbers will sometimes it won't add up to exactly 100%, which I kind of had to talk through yesterday with Scott. So it may be, so people can have a paid, say you work Monday and Tuesday, but you volunteer on Wednesday and Thursday. And that would show up in our numbers based on what the providers are billing for.
So I get the adult clients who I have represented in DDA community providers, it's not necessarily a discussion that comes up at the individualized team meeting about whether or not this client should be referred to DDA. And I didn't know, is there a standard trigger for that to happen? Because the individual's probably not going to ask for it because they may not know about it. So that's my question.
So that would be the CCS's responsibility to educate the person and the family of what DDA services are. I know when they make that initial referral, they're assigned, I'm going to say CCS because it's community, I always forget what all the C's stand for, but I know the S is services.
Community coordination of services.
That's it, coordinator of community services. My apologies.
No, it keeps changing.
Yeah. And so their responsibility at that time, at that beginning time, is to educate the family and individual of what DDA services are, kind of see what the individual or the person wants, sees for their lives, and so on and so forth, to do that planning. So it goes back to what kind of previous came up is the need to do a little bit more training for our providers as a whole, to their responsibilities and the rules and regulations that they should be following. And some of that too is due to turnover. So somebody last year, the CCS knew that they were supposed to do that, and they just hired somebody new, and the new person hasn't been told that yet. So it goes back to ongoing training, not just training one time, but being assured that we have ongoing training for individuals, for providers.
Stephanie,
Yeah, I agree.
that-
There's incredibly
that plan
turnover
gets-
of CCSs. And maybe we could add a recommendation, a note that, given the, transition of workers, that the, coordinators of community services get regular training on how to access DORS and when to access DORS and when to discuss whether DORS should be accessed, because I don't see that routinely happening.
So the plan gets updated annually, and I thought that there were changes made when we eliminated sub-minimum wage so that employment is discussed annually. I may not be recollecting that correctly, but that should be coming up at least once a year as part of the
It is
discussion,
discussed,
right?
but it's not
And the
discussed.
person-centered plan is a living document, I always like to say. So it doesn't they don't have to wait until annually. You update, they can update things as things are happening and coming about. Employment is one of the areas in which they are supposed to take an in-depth discussion during the planning meeting, employment, housing, and things like that, and to what they want their lives to look and be like, and there have been tools provided. So as part of the MOU with DORS, we have added that in, that we will be doing ongoing trainings together with both DORS and DDA providers, so that this, and as well as DDA will also do ongoing training and is currently doing ongoing training with their agencies that provide the CCS services.
So I was just requesting that the commission consider adding a specific recommendation of the training of, because it said joint training of DDA and DORS staff, but I think it'd be helpful to say community coordinators of community services also in that training, because they're not technically, unless something's changed, they're not technically DDA employees.
Okay, yep, we can certainly, I've got it noted. Thanks, Ellen. No, Stephanie, it would probably be part of a joint.
Do we have to say, that's how we would have to state it as part of a joint
Yep.
initiative, but we can't say we're going to have that training per se unless we get that permission.
Right, yeah, because they're contractors for them. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next topic. Okay. Keep going, because we just finished we just kind of went through that. All right, the next topic is the utilization of public-private partnerships to assist DORS services. These are the recommendations that came out of the last couple of meetings that we discussed this. Having links to resources for employers and individuals, and explore partnerships across the state to increase community-based services and training provided by DORS, including those in non-traditional settings, art, theater, music, and so forth, as well as develop partnerships with hospitals and universities to increase the opportunities in the medical field, and then finally spell out the process so employers know about their ability to partner with DORS for training and employment opportunities. So those were the recommendations thus far. So if we have any additional recommendations or discussions.
Renee?
I think when we're looking at these public-private partnerships.
Renee,
Looking at these public-private partnerships, I think I would like to see a recommendation around the the family serving and the individual serving organizations for families who have children with disabilities or youth with disabilities. Sorry, they're always children to me. And organizations like our Centers for Independent Living, which I know they're pre-ETS providers, but still they are working with lots of folks with disabilities. Parents Place of Maryland, who serves families who have children birth to 26. So 14 to 26 is a big population. So just really expanding that public-private partnership as far as resources, getting information out, because I think the more because there are multiple entry points where families and individuals get their information. So just broadening it and looking for all of those possible opportunities.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm looking at the last one, and I think I don't know if I have any recommendation to add, but just keep in mind when you're doing the training, sometimes we train like the organization, but then when the young person comes to the opportunity to work, the person that's working with them has no clue. Or they might not know what to do, what they're supposed to do. So just making sure that the training not only goes to the company, but the individuals who will actually be working with the students and families.
I had that note, ensuring the consistency and quality of the folks who are engaging with the businesses, whether it's family members, because we have family members doing self-direction, and I am very nervous about their limited understanding of where the lines are and how their role shifts if they're providing support. But just generally, right? Because when you have an individual who doesn't understand or doesn't have some of the skills or the certifications and so forth, and they're approaching business, and business has a negative experience, it creates an unwillingness to hire anyone ever again. And so not only are we losing out on that opportunity for one individual, but multiple individuals. And I do feel like we need to ensure better quality and consistency and clear expectations for anyone who's interfacing with an employer to ensure that. And the difference can be really when it's done right, it can be phenomenal, and it can open up additional doors and opportunities and so forth. So I think that like expanding what you're saying, Marlo, and ensuring that consistency and quality is there, regardless of what role they're playing, is really important for that partnership.
So do you think we need another, you captured what I was saying. Do you think we need another recommendation, or should we add it on to spell out? Like, because it is a difference in the quality and knowledge of the people who are working directly with students and families.
Let's make it its own recommendation, because I think it's important enough to have that.
Can I? Hey, Jim, can you add to that? So I'm just thinking about like Sephora. So Sephora is the employer, but there were key staff within Sephora that I know WTC staff worked with to provide training on how to work with individuals with disabilities. So do you think it's enough to just say, spell out the process so that employers and their employees know about it? I mean, is that what you're getting at, Jade?
No, I think they're two separate things. Okay. So and I apologize, I had to go take another call, but what I heard Marlo say was the individual providing supports to the job seeker with a disability, right? But then there's that employer piece of that training in terms of the coworkers and so forth, which is what you're saying. So I see them as sort of separate and distinct. And Marla, what I heard you saying was that point person that's interfacing with the employer and the employee, that's usually provided by a provider, but could be through self-direction. And I've heard a lot of issues and concerns about parents serving as job coach, calling up the business, not understanding what their lane is, and that makes me really, really nervous, because I know that once you've created that negative experience, then we have to work 3 times as hard, and we don't have we don't have enough time and energy to be having to create work for ourselves.
Develop a public, this comment is from Ellen, develop a public communication package including simple videos with diverse participants, one-page talking points, interviews on such programs like WYPR and other talk shows, featuring individuals with disabilities talking about their employment. Most people in Maryland probably do not know anything about DORS.
Okay.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
I'm sorry, and I lost my Zoom thing to see if somebody else was chatting or commenting. I gotta hop back on then. But I think we need to expand beyond just a focus on hospitals and universities. I think that we need to be ensuring that we're doing a broad cross-section of the employment opportunities and the interests of job seekers. I don't want us to get pigeonholed into just a few key things. I think that there needs to be a strategic plan that sort of outlines what are the different efforts across some of the different industries, and not just defaulting to one or two industries.
I agree, and bullet number 2 was an attempt to address that, but that could be made, either bullet number 2 or 3 could both be expanded. But I'm absolutely agree.
We should find partnerships that align with students' interests using data from the IEP. With the amen behind it.
Okay. Anything else on this particular topic?
Job development opportunities and employment opportunities. That's from Shanika again.
Shanika,
I was just saying to frame it more outside of just employment, but more job development activities, the exposure that students don't necessarily get. And I wholeheartedly agree that the hospital and the college locations are tending to be not as much of a high interest for students, and they have to choose we have to choose a course of study or career cluster on the IEP aligned to that student's goals. Why not run a report to see what the most, how many students are choosing what pathways, and then use that to align and find your partners based off of what the students in your district or in the state of Maryland are saying they want to do, versus just finding people who will just jump aboard.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So commission topic 6.
Number 6 is, should the eligibility criteria for the Division of Rehabilitation Services programs and services be altered? This should be a quick discussion. As we've mentioned before, the criteria for determining eligibility is specified in regulations, and so as such, neither DORS or the state have the authority to change what the criteria is used to determine eligibility for individuals who apply for VR services. So unless, yeah.
I think the comments that I've gotten from transition coordinators in schools is that it's very subjective, and that they've gotten, actually the most important thing that they said is that it should include that students not only with the most significant, but students with significant disabilities. And so that goes back to the budget issue of having more caseloads, more services, et cetera. But they also expressed frustration about getting different analysis or explanation from different vocational rehabilitation counselors. Thank you, Shanika's nodding. And so even though we all think these words mean something, they're incredibly subjective. And, I know that as I go through these application processes with my clients, your most significant may be my just significant. And it's a wide variety of professionals who are using their professional expertise to make those judgments, but those judgments still are subjective. Things that are not as subjective are like, how many white blood cells do you have in your blood sample? What is subjective is how much your anxiety disorder is impacting your ability to function in a workplace. How much your language impairment is impacting. So those were some of the frustrations that have been shared with me by people in the field who were trying to help their clients, students get vocational rehabilitation services. And they don't think they're getting clear and consistent guidance from counselors. So I don't know if Shanika wanted to jump in on that.
I mean, I agree. It's the same thing. I agree. I think different people have their different interpretations of the definition or what that means or what these words mean. I think it's important, even not just the DORS people or DORS reps or people at the agency, but even sometimes when that information is disseminated to district level staff or school-based staff, it then is interpreted differently. So then it's communicated and articulated differently. And so I definitely think that's something that needs to be mitigated, because we will continue to have that lack of understanding. And to be honest, I wholeheartedly think, because I might be guilty of it, I might have misinterpreted something, and the way I articulated it might not have been the way it should have been necessarily articulated. So I'm wondering that, I think that goes back to that whole DORS rep coming to a meeting or explaining it straight from the agency. And I know that that is humanly impossible with the lack of staffing, but maybe this is a talking point to think about, maybe quarterly having a commitment where a DORS representative goes to the local LEAs quarterly to present to the IEP chairs as a whole, or doing one of the systemic PDs, so those myths can be busted and those determinations and questions can be answered. And if we do it quarterly, at least those people that might not have gotten it first quarter, you can do updates. But I think there has to be some type of communication directly from DORS, because we all end up playing that phone game, and then it ends up being articulated incorrectly. And I feel like you are the only people that could articulate it correctly once you norm how it should be articulated with your staff, to then present it to the LEAs. So I think there needs to be some type of communication from DORS directly to the LEA. We all have systemic PDs built into our calendars. Maybe that's a commitment that can be made for both entities, so that if I work for city schools, I know that a DORS representative is going to be addressing my district at least once every quarter for me to sign up for that, or just things to think outside of the box, considering that they can't come, because this is very important, because significant disability versus just it can get very tricky when we are trying to articulate what is going to be eligible and what won't be eligible, if you get what I'm saying. It's kind of hard to articulate it now, but hopefully I got a point across.
Yeah, thanks, Shanika. I'll address it if I can. This is Jody. So we've done a couple of things over the past year. We developed the eligibility determination unit. So instead of each counselor determining eligibility for the applicants. We now have a group, hopefully we'll get up to about 15 counselors, we're at about 10 right now, that determine eligibility, and then every eligibility decision is reviewed by a supervisor. And we have 2 supervisors in the unit right now, so to increase consistency, they alternate. So one group of counselors does eligibility determinations and has them approved by one supervisor, and then next month they're approved by a different supervisor. So we get that kind of cross coverage and consistency. The other thing is we also have the appeal process. So if someone is determined to be significantly disabled or category 2, and they really feel that, we missed something, they can write a letter of appeal and say, I would like my eligibility decision to be reconsidered. And we do that on a routine basis. A lot of times they think that they've submitted certain documentation and then they realize they haven't. But once they give us another piece of documentation, as Ellen referenced, like maybe their anxiety disorder impacts them in many different ways that none of the other documentation addressed. So once we get that information, it's a fairly simple process to move them from category 2 to category 1 if we have all the documentation to show that they meet the eligibility criteria. So the criteria we can't change, and you're right, there is some level of subjectivity to it, but we're trying to iron that out by having the eligibility determination unit, trying to kind of account for that. But the other thing I was going to suggest maybe is we only have one transition specialist in the state, and there's like 23 different LEAs. Do you think like a newsletter, like a quarterly newsletter that states this information, like on the back of the newsletter, every time they have the same eligibility criteria information, would something like that be helpful for training the staff in the school systems?
Absolutely, I think so. But then also, I know some people have moved towards like video not tutorials, but like a video of, okay, this is like like we're doing a PowerPoint here or a presentation that we can just share here, click this link, or when we are doing PDs, that's something that's coming directly from you all that we'll just push play rather than us having to decipher it, figure out our own way of presenting it and still present it kind of wrong. So that's also
that's definitely something we could do.
That would be great because we have a transition hub we developed in Baltimore City. I can throw that link in there under our agency linkage page along with the DORS information. But we could also be disseminating that information as well through our PDs and our support we provide to schools. That would be very helpful.
Okay, that's great. That's a great suggestion. We can definitely do that and make the video accessible to everyone. Yep. Thank you.
Even the examples and on page 19 of Commission's topic number 10 recommendations, the example of non-severe, where one of the things is that the Jeff has ADHD but no meds or counseling. So that goes back to, let me just say, my wealthier clients, parents, the families, they're going to make sure that the child, gets the medication and gets counseling, et cetera. So if one of the criteria is whether or not the individual has had access or has had to access services, many families don't even know what services are available. And, and I hear IEP teams say, well, why didn't they ask for that? They don't know that they can ask for it, or English might not be their first language, or they may not have the level of education that makes them feel confident to communicate what the person's needs are. So I'm simply saying that I know that the law's not going to be, the federal law's not going to be changed, but I do think there has to be some sympathy and understanding about the context in which the individual has grown up that may have impacted their access to services. So.
Any other discussion? All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to commission topic Number 9, how should Maryland be investing in to better support jobs, DORS job training program? So this is the recommendation that came out. And so even though we kind of worked around it, but I think this is what we finally landed on. So I'll let you all have at it, discuss, have questions. Be more than happy to answer.
So I recommend that any of the staffing and the costs and so forth that you sort of combine so that there's one sort of budget request with all the documentation that covers all of the pieces, may be broken out, and so forth, and what's possible as a result. Why the maintenance of effort is important, right? Because there's some compelling arguments about that I think need to be understood. But then separate, why the staffing and what the staffing could do and so forth, because I feel like it's broken into pieces and I sort of have it, but when you move forward with the recommendations, I feel like it needs to be a much cleaner, broken out, and so that all the pieces and all the rationale can be seen in one place.
Okay.
I agree, and I think your earlier slide demonstrated the amount of money it would take to add in the needed positions plus more positions to reach into communities, because I think that's been a theme, and I know Andy Culp is, at least she wasn't on the last time I looked at the list of people, and Megan and I have all been saying that effort should be put into, as much as possible, having individuals with disabilities receive these services in their own communities. And so that would be a big piece of it, and also a piece of the budget.
Thank you. Eugene?
Quick question. For say your vacancies that you have for your DORS counselors, if you don't fill those vacancies, what happens to the money for those positions for that year? Does it just roll over or roll back?
Well, it
Give
depends
it back?
upon how those positions are funded. Now, again, a number of the positions are funded 80% federally funded and 20% state funding. Historically, if we had vacant positions, those state funds would revert back to the state. Now, just recently, they have given us, the Department of Budget Management has given us some new flexibility to actually move some of that funding into the case services budget to address, because to make sure that we are meeting match and maintenance of effort. But several years ago, we were right up against it because we had a number of vacancies we lost.
And just outside the box thinking, if it's not used, the money there, if we can possibly offer scholarships to students in schools of social work to kind of like, hey, we'll pay for you to go to school, but you got to come work for us for a couple years or whatever.
We can't, VR money is very, very restricted.
Okay.
But let me kind of go with that just a minute so we do that, but you already have to be working with us. So you already have to be an employee. It's the VR program is not a scholarship program. It's not a grant program. Every dollar literally has to get tied back to a person and a service somehow in some way. So even the training gets tied back to sort of the administrative cost, which then gets allocated across.
Student internships for college students, make them temporary employees of the state or something, but we should also look to create a pipeline of counselors for ourselves as well.
Well, there is that, we have a thought on that. We got to get the regular positions filled first. Okay. No, I appreciate the comment about adding the staff and that estimated salary cost in under this one, and I will certainly do that. All right. Last but not least, last one. Again, it was my recommendation, because I know we've had a lot of discussion, we've kind of hit around it today about order selection and so forth, so I've recommended that we make this its own topic of discussion. So, for your benefit, again, and since this was really a part of session 1, I went in for your benefit and added the categories, so you can review them and refresh your memory. Again, the federal law says that if you don't have enough resources, either financial or human, that you have to serve everybody, and again, everybody with a disability, and this would include individuals who are non-severe, then you have to create an order of selection and determine how you're going to serve those individuals. Law also requires that your highest priority is reserved for the most significantly disabled individual. So states have basically, in this case, Washington State has 5. They're the only state in the country with 5. They basically went out and really sort of sliced and diced our category 1 and made it turned it into 2 categories, and our category 2, which is significant, and made it into 2 categories. Their category 5 would be our category 3, basically a non-significant disability. Next slide. Other states have 4, and here's an example of 4. Again, here, they primarily, their category 1 aligns with our category 1 for the most part. Their 2 and 3 is really sort of a slice and dice of our category 2, and of course their 4 kind of does align with our category 3. So, again, just a quick review. Our category 1 is reserved for the most individuals with the most significantly disabled. We have an example there of an individual and the type of things we take a look at in order to determine them to be most significant. Next slide. Category 2 is our significant, and is again our example here kind of outlines, and again these are just examples of somebody. We actually try to go in. We actually went into cases and pulled the examples, so we made sure they were real life type of situations. And finally, our non-severe, and again, you know, here are some of the examples for those for that type of individual in that category. Now, going back through again, listening to the discussion that we've had on this. If you go to the recommendation, this was the only recommendation that that there was discussion, but this was the only thing that came out as a recommendation. So we see what we can do to talk about order selection. And again, some of it we may have already discussed, and we could maybe add some stuff here. But again, I welcome your comments and thoughts.
Lillian just gave a thumbs up. Couldn't hear you, Scott.
Oh. What is it they?
Anyways, so I think we missed like you went to. It sounds like you were finishing up order of selection, and then you went to kind of topic number 10, and then it sounded like you went back. We were just having a hard time hearing you, so maybe if you could.
Yeah.
Well, category. I mean, topic 10 is a catch-all. In other words, is there anything else the commission should consider for DORS? Is
Absolutely.
really
Yeah,
And so.
not just as it relates to order of selection, correct?
Right, this,
The eligibility
it's a
criteria.
this
Okay,
is a
that's
catch-all,
where-
but this.
That's where we were like,
Right.
is it just specific to order of selection,
It's-
or
it's
is it
not.
broad?
It's
Okay.
not.
Yeah,
It's-
because
it's
I
a-
have other ideas, but if we're finished with that topic.
Yeah, well, what I'm trying to say is, at this point, this is what we've kind of discussed. I mean, we'll have opportunities to bring up other items in later sessions, but so far, we brought this up under eligibility because that, I think most people associate eligibility with order selection, when reality, eligibility stands on itself because of the federal, sort of the regulations. Because you can be in order, you can be a state that has no order selection. You still have to go through that eligibility process. It isn't just a simple free-for-all and everybody gets to come in. So you still have to go through it. So I think where most people were getting confused was eligibility and order selection and so forth. So that's the reason why I've, since it has been sort of a ongoing theme, I felt that this would be the appropriate area for it to go into, is under 10. Not, like I said, 10 sort of a catch-all, so 10 at the end of the day may have 2 or 3 different recommendations under it, or different topics under it at the end of the day. But this is, the one, like you said, so.
Megan had a hand up, and then Jade, do you want to speak to this one?
I wanted to add, to this draft recommendation on the screen right now, that in addition to creating an understanding that it's for individuals seeking competitive integrated employment, I think emphasizing that individuals with the most significant disabilities, and again, a lot of my work focuses with younger 14 to 21 population, but emphasizing to that population and their parents that having a significant disability isn't a deterrent, but it's actually sort of the criteria that we're looking for in order to select individuals to support, to encourage them to apply. And maybe this is something, I know we're talking about wanting to make sure that folks know that you have to be seeking employment, something around getting that information out to parents and students about significant disability not being a factor that would rule you out, but rather rule you in, and encouraging them to think about, I think Ellen was talking about this once before, like really digging into what employment could look like and how it can focus on your interests and how to sort of have that conversation.
Jade, and then Ellen.
Sure. I don't know the best place for this. This seems to be as good a place as any. Among the things that the WIOA and the funding that you guys get changed is the requirement to report out on measurable skills gain. And failure to do so or to keep those numbers up means that you guys are at risk of losing funding. And so while this is not solely within DORS's purview, I think that it is so critical that the State Department of Education initiate at the leadership level an effort to work with the local school systems to figure out a way that is effective and doesn't require DORS to negotiate and manage lots of data sharing agreement to be able to get the skills gain data that you need for the students that are in school as they progress from year to year. I do feel like that is really, really critical. We're hearing and seeing from the states that are performing better in terms of their outcomes that, I just spoke with Utah this week, that it's being initiated at the leadership level, and that's what's pulling the local school systems to the table, and it's a coordinated effort. And I feel like that's something that MSDE could and should be helping to do that lift on, because you guys have limited staff, and that's a mammoth task to be able to capture that information from the school system. So I'd like to have something somewhere about how you all can get the support you need to be able to access that data, to be able to make your reporting outcomes so you don't lose resources. So.
Okay.
Ellen?
Yeah, a big part of the question that I don't think we have answered is, what is the benefit of DORS being at MSDE? And so I would like, it probably is not going to happen today, but it's a follow-up to the comments that were just made, is to think about what is the value added to individuals with disabilities by having DORS be at MSDE, and what more could be done to have better coordination, just like we were asking in the earlier slides about DDA coordinating with DORS, and we were discussing the Behavioral Health Administration and how it was coordinating with DORS. I really want to understand, is there more value added from, there's incredible teams and levels of teams at MSDE that I don't know are being fully utilized to support DORS' work. And also that DORS has incredible staff who could enhance MSDE's work. And I feel like, at least I have not heard as a member of this commission, how that's handled and who's the one sort of analyzing how all of those different pieces of both MSDE and DORS can work together to support each other. So that's one huge bucket in my mind. And then the other piece is that I think we are in Maryland violating the Americans with Disabilities Act in terms of not having human beings with disabilities integrated into their communities. The Supreme Court's decision in 1999 in Olmstead versus LC found that the unjustified segregation of people with disabilities is a form of unlawful discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think we have lots of people in centers and facilities-based programs, and even, or any of the DORS programs that are at the main center, could those be moved out into the communities or extended into communities to make them more accessible? So exploring the ways that we can fully integrate individuals with disabilities into their own communities, and reducing illegal segregation in facilities-based and other kinds of segregated centers. I know it's been a long time since 1999, so it's a slow process, but I think it's important because I think DORS has a lot of resources, and if we can get it more resources to help people be part of their communities as opposed to these centers. So thank you guys for listening to me.
Hey, Ellen, excuse me, this is Jody. I just wanted to clarify one thing about the Workforce and Technology Center, and Jim, feel free to add on. So even though the individuals choose to come to the Workforce and Technology Center rather than going to a community college or whatever, they choose to come there because they do get a lot of the additional tutoring or wraparound services. They complete their training program there. They are in an integrated setting because they're in and amongst all the DORS employees at the same time. But also, when they do their internships or externships, they don't go out like as a group and do these. They go out to CVS. It might be the CVS in their community, or they go out to an auto repair shop in their community. They're not doing every bit of the training. They're doing kind of the classroom training at the center, but when they're getting their internships or their externships, they are doing that. And the WTC Employment Services staff work really hard to set up those externships in their communities. So I just want to clarify that. I wasn't sure if that was clear when we talked about it earlier.
Thanks so much. I guess it's the question would be, could any of those services be moved into, the Eastern Shore or Western Maryland or other parts of Maryland, either duplicated or, extended into those communities? Thanks for the clarification. I think Megan had a question along the same line.
So Megan's question says, why can't that level of support and tutoring be provided at community colleges? We don't have control over what the community colleges do or do not provide. And we currently don't have the level of staff that can go out to all of the community colleges to provide that support, so.
The other thing I will point out is the Workforce and Technology Center is considered a public community rehab program, and it is authorized under the Rehabilitation Act, including under the 2014 reauthorizations. So the VR program allows for training to occur in non-integrated settings because it is a training program. Also, RSA has put out guidance that because of client choice, consumer choice, it is the individual's choice to attend the program at the Workforce and Technology Center. We do provide a lot of training out in the community if that is the choice of the individual. So I understand what you're saying, but the centers are, whether it be the Workforce and Technology Center or even our private, the DDA providers or BHA providers, they're all authorized to provide services under the Rehabilitation Act as community rehabilitation providers.
Well, if I could just add to that some, and I appreciate that. I'm James Evans, and I do work at the Workforce Technology Center. I'm one of the directors there. And I've worked there for 21 years. I've worked with DORS for 28 years. I worked in a nonprofit prior to that. I do have a master's in education from George Washington, a CRC certified rehab counselor. So I have been all over the country. I've seen a lot of scenarios. I've seen other centers. I've seen other states. I've seen other formats. But I guess, part of it is, WTC and other things like it, we do not house people there and they don't live there other than by their own choice in our dormitory, which actually is a very transformational process. Because a lot of the students we serve don't go to college. They never do go to college. They might not go away for the first time in their life. Coming to WTC and staying in our dormitory is a transformational life experience frequently for our clients, because it's the first chance to get away from home, to be independent, to grow their skills and things that they wouldn't get if they never left home or never had an experience like the WTC. Certainly, people choose to come to WTC. They choose to go to a community college. Community college has disability support services. That's great. They may or may not be as excellent as what we do, but again, people have choices. But the WTC, again, it does, the level of the community involvement that we do through our technology department, through our training programs, we do run a program, for instance, Sephora. Students never step foot in the WTC. They literally go directly to Sephora and work there and are trained there, and we send our staff there, and they transition directly to employment and get excellent jobs, as an example. And we're developing others. We actually have 2 businesses now that we're engaging with the same concept. We just got finished writing a 16-page paper for Scott for all of the concepts of how we could extend the training programs in other parts of the state, partner with possibly schools, partner with community colleges, other community providers. So it's absolutely a fascinating and wonderful, like we welcome that and we want your input because we would love to do that, right? We just don't have the staff. We used to have 400 staff at WTC when it opened. We have about 85 now. We literally had 400 staff in 1973, and now we have 85. And we still do a tremendous amount of training and work, an absolutely tremendous. But what makes WTC is the people that work there. And any place that you serve, it's the people. It's not a building. It's not anything but. And that is what we need, is we need more people, which has been said. The 14 that he represented are probably from the document that our staff prepared, is the concept that, yes, we could absolutely extend these services to the community. But it involves partnering because we can't be in all those places unless we literally put people in those places and utilize and braid services with the other organizations because we can't do it alone, right? We can't, unless we got a cloning machine, which I would love to have, we cannot clone. But we have amazing staff, and I challenge you to come and meet my staff and meet and watch the students and see what really goes on at WTC. And I know it's hard. What I really appreciate about this commission is that, we all have given our whole lives. Some of the people at WTC work there 40 and 50 years, ever since it's been opened, right? And people like us have given our whole lives to this. But the thing is it's a little hard for us because that's all we know. That's all we do. That's who we are, right? And we don't see it from the outside. So this commission's been helpful for me to see you all see it from the outside and see how we can improve, because we think we're doing a great job, but there's always room for improvement. And this commission is allowing that opportunity for us to see where we can improve and how we can do that and how we can braid the resources and why it's beneficial to be an MSDE versus labor. And I've talked to people from all these other states that are in different organizations, and there is a great benefit, and we can maximize the benefit of being able to be even better related in the school system and get those records and information. But I guess, my point is that I think that you all, which I thought was fascinating by Megan's point earlier, is that when we started to tell you the things that we experience as the employees doing it, because you don't work for us, but you can see us from the outside. But now we're finally being some transparency here, and we're showing you the things that occur internally that we struggle with that are difficult for us. And I think, what I thought Megan's point was interesting. She said, well, could you take more of the services in-house then? Because it's hard to, get the quality and the cooperation from providers. I think that speaks to that very point. That's the point. Scott has told me frequently that the modest staff of the WTC Employment Services Department outperforms every community rehab program in the number of placements and the outcomes for employment services. And we have a very small staff. But that's the point, is it is easier to control things and to provide quality when you personally are supervising someone, right? When you are managing a program. It is harder to, control quality for when you're dealing with, that you have to hold someone accountable who doesn't report to you, right? Who you don't employ, right? So, I think to your point, Megan, is I think, again, as we shared the information and the struggles that we have and you see the things we have, you kind of see the value of how we do what we do. But I think the point has been taken, and we came away very much so in developing this document for Scott, as we looked at some absolutely great possibilities of how we could essentially branch the WTC services out into the community in partnership with other entities and organizations. And so we really look forward to that, and we're excited about that. We have never not done that. We have worked immensely. We have a dual customer approach at DORS as a VR agency, right? So we are both our customer is both Maryland businesses and the consumer. And that's been a mantra of VR for decades now. But that's really the thing too, is when you talk about strategic planning, looking at what needs to be done, you look at what the state of Maryland needs, what industry, what jobs are there, and then you look at what consumers want to do, and then you try to put those things together, or you create those opportunities. And that's what we're excited about doing. So, but I just want to say on behalf of those that work at WTC and DORS is we really appreciate the input and the feedback that you're all giving us, because it is hard sometimes, to see what's going on in your own family, right? But when someone comes from the outside and points things out, it's very helpful. And so we appreciate that.
So we have a couple of comments in the chat. Megan, it's 3:56, so I'm going to Megan, you go ahead with your comment because we have a lot of it captured in the chat for like 2 minutes. Megan, oh.
I'm sorry. I put it all in the chat. I don't need to say it out loud.
I'll read it, sure. So Megan's comment in the chat was, the sticking point for me is that yes, individuals have the opportunity to choose to go to the WTC or another provider or college, but I also keep hearing that the WTC provides more support than the other programs provide, which makes it less of a choice. Since one of the things we are considering is partnerships, I'd like to propose a recommendation that DORS consider partnerships with the community colleges, maybe not all of them, but some in each region, in order to create similar support opportunities for individuals who might choose to go to community college if they had the support currently provided in the separate setting at WTC. And I would just offer as an example that we have the Pathways program. It's for students who are on the spectrum. We have a program that's run out of the WTC, but they do go out to the community colleges and provide support to the students at the colleges. And then Shanika's comment said, I totally agree that changes in the process are necessary for improvement, but I have to share that I've been to WTC recently with my staff for a tour. I wish we had more locations and more staff to offer more opportunities for our population. I was happy to see one of our former students there working, and he shared his experience there. I agree that people should go visit.
And I suggested that one of our meetings should be there.
There's a couple more comments. Ellen said we were completely supportive of expanding DORS staff, increasing DORS budget. And then Lillian said CCBC and MSDE DORS has an interagency agreement that offers many services. The program is titled Pathways. Thanks, Lillian. That's exactly what I was talking about. So we do partner with CCBC on a lot of different training programs, and then the Pathways program is an excellent program.
I have 3:58. Scott, do you have anything else?
I don't.
Thank you all so much for expanding the time. We really, we're going to save the chat. We have everything captured. Our next meeting is
These are proposed dates.
January 23rd. Know that you can email Scott at any time if you come across something that you're thinking about, you want to reword some of the recommendations. Please know that you can do that, but I hope that you feel like you got a lot of time today to look over the recommendations and add your thoughts and opinions. Scott?
Again, I want to thank everybody. I know we covered a lot in these first 4 meetings, so I'm grateful that you all had the opportunity for us to expand the time frame today. So after this one, things will slow down a little bit. We'll only cover one topic. Topic 7 is actually the topic Ellen has talked about DORS being located at the Maryland State Department of Education. And then again, we're proposing January 23rd. A couple people approached me after the last meeting with session occurring that that would be best if we move to Mondays because that's a less hectic day down in Annapolis. So all these days are Mondays. So topic 7 will be discussion on MSD and DORS. Then the 13th is topic number 8. And then topic number 8 is whether or not a separate board should be created within MSDE to oversee the Division of Rehabilitation Services. And then March 6th, we will then do a final review of all the recommendations that have been made. And again, any of the recommendations and so forth can be modified and updated. Hopefully, I will have captured everything that you guys have recommended, and we'll put it into the interim report. If we need to expand on it, we can do so at the March 6th meeting.
One question.
I mean, the recommendations themselves are really is what's going to be, the report. A lot of what is in the report itself is just what you've all been seeing on the slides, and so forth, sort of capturing some of the comments and so forth. The report is due a week from today, and we're busily working on it, trying to get it finalized before that due date. Okay.
Thank you. There's lots of warm wishes coming to everybody from the chat, to everyone in the room. So happy holidays and enjoy a safe and happy holiday.
Thank you all again, and everybody on Zoom, have a safe and happy holidays as well. Take care.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.